cold wind moves across the Mongolian steppe before dawn, flattening the grass until the whole earth seems to breathe in one direction. There are no walls here, no crowded streets, no marble temples rising above rivers, no permanent city from which a ruler can imagine that the world belongs to him. There is only distant sky animals' hunger, and the hard knowledge that a family can live or die by the condition of its horses. In winter the air cuts like a blade. In summer dust lifts from the hooves of grazing herds and hangs beneath a sun that gives little mercy. A person born here learns early that the horizon is not scenery. It is warning, promise, and road. Long before the Mongol Empire becomes the largest contiguous land empire in history, long before armies from the steppe ride into China, Persia, Rus-Hungary, and the edges of the Islamic world, this landscape is already making people into something the settled empires never fully understand. The steppe does not reward softness, but it also does not reward foolish courage. It rewards memory, patience, alertness, cooperation, and speed. A herder must know where grass survives after drought, where snow lies too deep where water can be found, which clan may offer marriage, which camp may steal animals in the night, and which insult may become a blood feud lasting generations. The evidence remains incomplete for many parts of early steppe life because nomads leave fewer stone monuments and written archives than city-states do. But what survives in archaeology later chronicles burial remains, and the patterns of pastoral life suggests a world that is never empty, even when it looks empty from far away. The grasslands of Mongolia are part of a wider Eurasian steppe belt stretching like a rough corridor from Manchuria toward the Black Sea. For thousands of years this corridor carries animals, weapons, languages, trade goods, technologies, and fears. Earlier steppe confederations rise and vanish here: the Xiongnu, the Xianbei, the Turk, the Uyghurs, the Khitan, and others whose names survive unevenly in Chinese records and inscriptions. They are not simply wandering tribes drifting without purpose. They form alliances, tribute systems, military hierarchies, diplomatic traditions, and fragile empires of their own. Scholars still debate how directly these older steppe powers shaped the later Mongols, but the pattern is clear enough. The steppe has long known how to produce states without cities, rulers without palaces, and armies that seem to appear from nowhere, because their homeland itself is movement. To the south, Chinese dynasties watch the northern frontier with a mixture of contempt, fear, and practical calculation. They build walls, fortresses, markets, and border garrisons. They trade silk, grain, metal goods, and luxury items for horses, livestock, furs, and peace. They also try to divide steppe peoples against one another, offering titles to one leader and punishments to another. To settled officials, nomads often appear poor because they do not measure wealth in the same way. Yet a good horse, a strong bow, a healthy herd, and loyal kin can be more valuable on the steppe than a chest of coins. The surprising detail is that these frontier relationships are not merely raids and defences. They are a long, unstable negotiation between two ways of organising life: the field and the city, the herd and the granary, the tent and the archive. The Mongols, who will one day terrify half the known world, are born from this older frontier reality. Their early society is divided among clans and lineages tied together by kinship, oath, marriage, rivalry, and revenge. A leader does not simply command because he owns land. Land itself cannot be owned in the same fixed way when survival depends on seasonal movement. Authority comes from followers, animals, prestige, distribution of plunder, and the ability to protect people when hunger, enemy raids, or political betrayal arrives. This makes power both flexible and unstable. A chief who fails can be abandoned. A poor outsider with enough skill can rise, though not easily. Loyalty must be fed, rewarded, and constantly renewed. At the centre of this world stands the horse, Not as decoration, not as a symbol on a banner, but as the engine of existence. Children learn to ride almost as they learn to walk. Mares provide milk which can be fermented into aerug. Herds provide meat hides, transport trade and status. A Mongol warrior may travel with several horses, changing mounts to keep speed over enormous distances. This detail later shocks settled armies, who often imagine a campaign as a line of soldiers dragging supplies behind them. The steppe warrior carries much of his supply system alive beneath and around him. Horses turn a distance from obstacle into weapon, yet the horse alone does not explain what's coming. Many steppe peoples ride well. Many shoot from horseback. Many raid borders. The force that rewrites world history will require something more an unusual political reordering, a system capable of binding scattered groups into a disciplined machine. But before that system appears, the conditions must ripen in hardship. The late 12th century Mongolian steppe is not a peaceful wilderness waiting for one man to unite it. It is a fractured zone of competing groups, Mongols, Tatars, Kerate, Naiman, Merkits, and others, each with leaders, grievances, alliances, and memories of violence. Chinese frontier politics add pressure from the south. Old rivalries burn. Families are taken, camps are attacked, herds are stolen, and children inherit enemies before they understand why. This is the world into which Temujin is born, though the details of his early life come through sources written later, especially the secret history of the Mongols, a remarkable text that mixes political memory, oral tradition, praise, humiliation, and mythic atmosphere. It is invaluable, but not simple. Scholars still debate how to separate precise fact from remembered meaning. What matters for the larger story is that Temujin's childhood, whether in every detail literal or shaped by later memory, is remembered not as the childhood of a prince secure in luxury, but as the childhood of someone nearly destroyed by the steppe's cruelty. His family is abandoned, his household struggles. He learns that bloodline alone does not save anyone. Hunger is not an idea. Betrayal is not an abstraction. The steppe teaches him that survival depends on building bonds stronger than inherited clan loyalty. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. Because the story that begins in this wind-bent grass does not remain in Mongolia. It will reach the libraries of Baghdad, the walls of Beijing, the forests of Rus, the plains of Hungary, the markets of Samarkand, and the sea lanes of East Asia. But its first truth is small and severe. A world empire begins with people who know how to endure, where settled observers see only emptiness. The landscape itself shapes Mongol imagination. A city wall may seem strong, but to a steppe rider it is also a trap. A road may seem necessary, but to someone who reads grass stars, river valleys, and animal movement, the land is full of roads. A border may appear firm on a map, but on horseback borders blur into zones of grazing, tribute raiding, and negotiation. This difference in perception becomes one of the great hidden forces of history. Many settled empires think in terms of centres and edges. The Mongols learn to think in networks, routes, and pressure points. They understand how to move around strength, how to strike supply, how to retreat without defeat, how to lure an enemy into exhaustion. Their world is not disorganized because it lacks cities. It is organized differently. Still, the steppe is not romantic. Its freedom has teeth. Drought can scatter herds. A harsh dzud, when ice or snow seals grass away from animals, can ruin families. Disease can move through livestock. A feud can turn neighbors into killers. Women carry heavy burdens in this mobile society, managing camps, processing dairy, raising children, handling animals, maintaining household production, and sometimes exercising political influence behind and beyond the movements of men. Elite women in steppe societies can be powerful actors arranging alliances and preserving lineages, though the record often gives them less space than they deserve. The empire that later emerges is not built only by riders in battle. It is sustained by households that can pack, move, produce, remember, and survive. A lesser-known but crucial feature of steppe life is its relationship with information. In a land where danger may appear suddenly across distance, news matters. Who has allied with whom? Which leader has died? Where herds are moving? Which army is gathering? Which pass is open? Which river can be crossed? These are matters of life and death. Later, the Mongols will turn this instinct into imperial infrastructure, with relay stations and messengers crossing continents. But the roots lie here in a society where listening is survival. Rumour scout envoy, captive merchant, and bride can all carry intelligence. The steppe is a living communication field long before it becomes an imperial postal system. When outsiders later describe the Mongols as a sudden storm, they are partly right and partly wrong. To those who face them unprepared, the rise of the Mongol Empire does feel like weather fast, overwhelming, almost impossible to negotiate with once it arrives. But storms have causes, pressure builds, winds gather, systems form before they break across the land. The Mongol explosion of the 13th century grows from older steppe traditions, frontier politics, ecological pressures, personal ambition, military innovation, and the rare ability of one leader to turn a violent, divided world into something coordinated. No single explanation fully accounts for this transformation. Climate may have played a role. Some research suggests periods of favourable moisture on the steppe may have supported larger herds and greater military mobility, though scholars still debate how decisive this was. Political fragmentation among neighbouring states mattered. The weakness and rivalry of enemies mattered. The military habits of pastoral nomads mattered. But all of these conditions had existed in different forms before. The difference comes when Temujin, later known as Genghis Khan, learns to use the steppe's old materials in a new way. For now, before the title, before the conquests, before the empire stretches across maps like a dark brushstroke, there is only the grassland and a boy born into danger. The world beyond Mongolia does not yet know his name. The great cities continue their business. Merchants count goods under tiled roofs. Scholars copy manuscripts by lamplight. Farmers repair irrigation channels. Kings measure power in fortresses and tax rolls. Few of them imagine that somewhere beyond the northern frontiers, among felt tents and horse herds, a new political force is forming that will not merely invade their world, but connect it, wound it, reorder it, and leave behind questions that remain unsettled centuries later. The steppe keeps its silence a little longer, then hooves begin to move. Temujin enters the record not as a conqueror, but as a child surrounded by insecurity. His father Yesugei belongs to a noble Mongol lineage, yet nobility on the steppe is never the same as safety. A family may carry an honoured ancestry and still wake one morning with too few allies, too little food, and too many enemies. The later tradition remembers Temujin's birth with signs of destiny, but beneath those legendary touches lies a harsher truth. His early world is built from fragile bonds, and those bonds break quickly. His father arranges a marriage alliance for him while he is still young, linking him to Berta, a girl from the Ongarat people. Such arrangements are not romantic details placed at the edge of politics. They are politics. Marriage binds camps, moves trust between families, and creates obligations that can matter as much as weapons. On the journey back, according to Mongol tradition, Yesugei is poisoned by Tatar's old enemies, whose feud with his people runs deep. The evidence for the exact event comes through later sources, so scholars still debate the details, but what survives in the record suggests a sudden collapse in Temujin's household. With Yesugei, dead protection evaporates. The family's followers abandon them. This is one of the most revealing moments in the remembered story because it shows how power works before Temujin changes it. Loyalty is not automatic. A widow and her children, however noble their blood, may be left behind if they no longer seem useful. Temujin's mother, Holun, holds the family together in conditions of humiliation and hunger. She gathers wild foods, keeps the children alive, and preserves the memory that they are not finished. It is easy to pass over this survival as background, but it may be one of the foundations of the empire. Before Temujin commands armies, he watches a household survive abandonment through disciplined labor and refusal to disappear. The steppe teaches him that kinship can fail. That lesson returns again and again. In one grim episode, Temujin kills his half-brother Bekta after conflict over food and authority within the family. The story is disturbing, and it should be. It is not the polished childhood of a saintly founder. It suggests a world where scarcity turns domestic tension into violence, and where leadership begins with a brutal struggle over who controls the smallest resources. No single explanation fully accounts for the episode, and later storytellers may have shaped it to reveal character guilt or destiny. Yet its presence in Mongol tradition is striking. The empire's founder is not remembered as innocent. He's remembered as dangerous, wounded, and already learning that survival has a cost. Temujin is later captured by the tattooed former allies who now treat him as a threat. They place him in a wooden collar, a device meant to shame and restrain. His escape becomes one of the great scenes of his early life, a vulnerable young man fleeing through night and water, helped by people who choose compassion or calculation over obedience. Whether every detail happened exactly as preserved is uncertain, but the meaning is clear. Temujin learns that loyalty can come from unexpected places. A low-status helper may be more valuable than a noble relative. A person outside the old circle may become the difference between death and return. This idea becomes central to his later rule. Temujin's genius is not simply that he is fierce. Many men on the steppe are fierce. His deeper innovation is that he begins to build loyalty across the lines that once trapped him. He values personal allegiance, proven service, and shared danger. He remembers those who help him. He punishes betrayal with terrifying severity. He draws followers not only from inherited kin, but from companions, defectors, defeated enemies, and men of ability who might have remained obscure under older aristocratic systems. The evidence remains incomplete for the earlier stages of this process, but the pattern becomes unmistakable as his power grows. Berta's role also becomes decisive. Temujin returns to claim the marriage arranged in childhood, and through her he strengthens ties with her family. Soon after, she's abducted by the Merkits, an event that echoes an earlier abduction in Temujin's family history, because his own mother had been taken from another man by Yesugei. Steppe politics often turns women into the living prizes and wounds of conflict. Berta's capture is personal, but it is also political. Temujin cannot ignore it without losing honor and authority. To rescue her, he must seek help from stronger allies. He turns to Togrul, ruler of the Keret, who had once been sworn brother to Temujin's father, and to Jamuka, Temujin's own, Anda, a sworn companion. These alliances help him recover Berta and defeat the Merkits. Yet the rescue does more than restore a marriage. It places Temujin inside the larger politics of the steppe. He is no longer merely a survivor from an abandoned family. He becomes a man around whom followers can gather, a leader, connected to powerful patrons, a figure whose personal injury becomes the cause of collective war. Jamuka is especially important because he represents both intimacy and rivalry. The two men are remembered as close companions before they become enemies. Their conflict later becomes a struggle between different visions of steppe order. Jamuka stands more closely with aristocratic tradition, noble hierarchy and older patterns of tribal leadership. Temujin increasingly builds something more disruptive, drawing men upward through loyalty and usefulness. Scholars still debate how sharply this contrast should be drawn, because sources may simplify a complicated rivalry into moral drama. But the broad difference matters. The future Mongol Empire is born not only from conquest against outsiders, but from a civil struggle over what kind of society the steppe will become. Temujin's early rise is uneven. He gains followers, loses them, suffers defeat, rebuilds and studies the weaknesses of those around him. He learns that generosity after victory can bind men more tightly than birth. He learns that distributing plunder fairly matters. He learns that a leader who hoards wealth loses trust. He also learns that mercy and terror are both tools, and he will use both. This combination unsettles modern readers because it resists simple judgment. Temujin can be loyal to companions and ruthless to enemies. He can elevate the low-born and destroy entire resisting communities. The record suggests not contradiction, but a hard political logic shaped by a world where hesitation often invites annihilation. By the time he begins to gather real power, the boy abandoned on the steppe has become a man who understands abandonment better than his rivals do. He knows the old system from underneath. He has felt what happens when noble families are discarded, when alliances fail, when hunger enters the tent, when enemies decide that a child is safer dead than grown. That memory does not make him gentle. It makes him determined to build a structure in which loyalty flows toward him more directly than toward clan elders' old names or temporary convenience. The strange thing is that the Mongol Empire, which will later seem to outsiders like pure destruction, begins with this intimate problem of trust. Who stays when fortune collapses? Who shares food? Who risks punishment to help a captive escape? Who rides with a leader before victory is certain? Temujin's answer will eventually reorder the steppe. From broken kinship he creates chosen allegiance. From humiliation he creates discipline. From personal revenge he creates a political movement. The world beyond the grassland still does not see it clearly, but the first shape of the storm is already forming, not in a palace or temple, but in the memory of hunger, betrayal and survival. The steppe that Temujin inherits is full of names that carry old pride and old wounds. Mongol, Tatar, Kerate, Naiman, Merkit, Taichiud. Each group has its own leaders, loyalties, grazing claims, marriage ties, and memories of insult. To outsiders, these names can blur together into the vague idea of nomads, as if everyone beyond the frontier belongs to one restless mass. But on the ground, the divisions are sharp. A camp knows who has stolen from it. A family knows who killed a father, who took a bride, who broke an oath, who failed to answer a call for help. The steppe is wide, but memory makes it crowded. Temujin's achievement is not that he conquers people who have never known organization. The steppe already has organization. What he changes is the basis of that organization. Older loyalties depend heavily on lineage, aristocratic rank, and shifting tribal confederations. A leader rises by birth, charisma, marriage force, and the promise of plunder. But his followers may drift away when another chief appears more fortunate. Temujin has lived the danger of that system. His father's followers abandoned the family when protection seemed costly and reward uncertain. He understands that a political order built only on inherited loyalty can collapse at the precise moment loyalty matters most. So he begins to make something harder, colder, and more durable. He does not erase kinship because no leader on the steppe can simply pretend blood no longer matters. But he reduces its power by binding men directly to himself and to a new collective identity. Those who serve well can rise. Those who betray are destroyed. Those who join after defeat may be absorbed sometimes with startling pragmatism. The evidence remains incomplete for each individual decision, and later sources often present Temujin's reforms as if they unfolded with perfect clarity from the beginning. Real history is usually messier. Still, what survives in the record suggests a leader deliberately breaking the old tribal pattern and replacing it with a system based on obedience, merit, shared spoils, and imperial discipline. One of the most important steps is the reorganization of people into military and social units, arranged by tens, hundreds, thousands, and 10,000s. This decimal structure is not entirely invented from nothing, because steppe and inner Asian states had used similar arrangements before, but under Temujin it becomes a central tool of transformation. Men from different clans can be grouped together, making it harder for old loyalties to dominate. Command becomes clearer, responsibility becomes collective. If one man deserts, others may answer for him. If a unit performs well, reward can be distributed through known channels. A society that once moved through webs of kin and feud begins to move through command. This sounds administrative, almost dry, but on the steppe it is revolutionary. Imagine a warrior who once thought first of clan uncle-cousin and inherited enemy. Now he rides beside men from other lineages under a commander whose authority comes from the Khan. His future depends not only on his blood but on his performance. He may receive animals, wives, captives, goods, or rank because of service. He may also be punished with a severity that leaves little room for private rebellion. Temujin does not ask people to become gentle citizens of a peaceful state. He asks them to become parts of a war-making order, more reliable than the old world of feuding camps. At the centre of this transformation stands the Kurultai, the great assembly in which leaders gather to confirm power. Such assemblies are not democratic in the modern sense, but they matter. They give political decisions a form of collective recognition. Around 1206, after years of warfare against rivals, Temujin is proclaimed Genghis Khan, often understood as universal or oceanic ruler, though scholars still debate the exact meaning of the title. The title matters less as ornament than as announcement. He is no longer only one successful steppe chief among others. He claims a wider authority, one meant to gather the peoples of the steppe into a single political and military force. The defeated are not always treated the same way. Some enemies are annihilated, especially those associated with repeated betrayal or resistance. Others are incorporated. This selective ruthlessness becomes one of the most unsettling features of Mongol expansion. The Mongols can kill on a massive scale, but they are not mindless destroyers. They often preserve useful artisans, engineers, scribes, doctors, merchants, and administrators. They adopt technologies and talents from conquered peoples. On the steppe itself, Temujin's willingness to absorb defeated followers helps him grow stronger after each victory. A rival tribe does not merely vanish. Parts of it may be redistributed into the new order, stripped from old leaders and attached to new commands. A lesser-known but revealing detail is the importance of personal companions who rise with him. Men such as Jelme Subutai Jebe, and others remembered not simply as noble heirs, but as figures whose loyalty and ability earn extraordinary trust. Jebe, according to tradition, once fought against Temujin and shot his horse. Instead of executing him after capture, Temujin values his honesty and skill, giving him a new name associated with the arrow. Whether the story is polished by later memory or not, it captures a real principle of Mongol politics. Talent can be more useful than revenge, provided it is submitted completely to the Khan. Temujin also attacks theft, kidnapping, unauthorized raiding, and internal disorder among his own people, not because he rejects violence, but because he wants violence controlled. Private raiding weakens unity. Unregulated revenge pulls people backward into the old world. If war is to enrich the new order, it must be directed outward and disciplined inward. Later tradition connects these norms to the yasa often described as a law code of Genghis Khan. The exact nature of the yasa is debated, and no complete original text survives. Some later writers may have exaggerated or misunderstood it. But the broader reality is clear enough. The Mongol state develops rules, punishments and expectations that bind the elite and the ordinary warrior alike under the Khan's authority. Religion also receives a practical form of tolerance. The steppe world already contains diverse beliefs, shamanic practices, reverence for eternal heaven, Nestorian Christianity among some tribes, Buddhism, Islam, and other traditions across neighboring regions. Genghis Khan does not build his empire around forced conversion. He seeks legitimacy from heaven, but he often allows religious specialists of different communities to function, sometimes granting privileges. This is not modern pluralism. It is imperial pragmatism, and it serves a political purpose. A ruler who wants to command many peoples cannot afford to make every local god into an enemy at once. The result is a new kind of unity forged not by shared ethnicity in the simple sense, but by shared submission to a leader and a system. Even the name Mongol expands. What had once referred to a particular group becomes the identity of a conquering people made from many steppe elements. The empire begins by remaking the steppe before it remakes the world. This is easy to miss because the later campaigns are so spectacular. Beijing under pressure, Samarkand in flames, Baghdad shattered, European knights stunned by tactics they do not understand. Yet none of that happens without the earlier, quieter violence of reorganization, where the old tribal landscape is broken apart and rebuilt into an army, with a society attached to it. No single explanation fully accounts for why Temujin succeeds where earlier leaders fail. His personal charisma matters, but charisma alone dies when a horse stumbles or a battle is lost. The military traditions of the steppe matter, but those traditions existed before him. Ecological conditions may have helped, and political divisions among enemies certainly opened doors. But the crucial change is institutional. Temujin turns loyalty into structure. He makes reward predictable enough to attract followers, and punishment terrifying enough to discourage betrayal. He gives ambitious men a reason to see their future in him, rather than in older clan hierarchies. There is a dark clarity to this achievement. The unity he creates reduces some forms of internal violence, while preparing far greater violence beyond the steppe. Families who once feared raids from neighboring clans may now ride in campaigns against distant cities. Men who once fought over herds may now divide silver captives and estates from civilizations they had barely imagined. Order at home becomes expansion abroad. Peace among the Mongols becomes war for others. By the time the steppe is unified under Genghis Khan, the transformation is already larger than one man's revenge or ambition. A new political organism has appeared, mobile and disciplined, able to learn from enemies, absorb specialists, and move with frightening speed. The grassland has produced not merely raiders, but an empire in embryo. The settled world still sees frontier peoples through old assumptions, imagining that walls, numbers, and cities guarantee superiority. Genghis Khan is about to test that belief against horsebow law intelligence, and a unity born from the ruins of betrayal. The army that grows from Genghis Khan's new order does not look at first glance like the armies of the great settled empires. It does not depend on heavy wagons crawling behind infantry columns. It does not need paved roads in the same way a city-based army does. It does not move as a single thick mass, easy to see, easy to count, easy to block. It spreads, gathers, vanishes, returns, and strikes from distances that seem almost unreasonable to enemies trained to think of war as a contest between visible formations. To face it is not simply to face men on horses. It is to face a different understanding of time and space. The Mongol warrior's most famous weapon is the composite bow made from wood-horn sinew and careful craft. Shorter than many infantry bows but powerful from horseback, It allows a rider to shoot while moving, turning, retreating, or circling at speed. This is not casual archery. It requires years of training, balance, muscle memory, and the ability to control a horse with knees and weight, while both hands serve the bow. A settled soldier may be trained for battle after recruitment. A steppe rider grows inside a military education almost from childhood, because riding, hunting, herding, and fighting share the same physical language. The horse is not merely transport. It is the Mongol army's second body. Each warrior may bring several mounts, switching between them to preserve endurance. This lets Mongol forces cover extraordinary distances, sometimes moving, with a speed that makes reports of their approach seem impossible or contradictory. One town hears they are far away, another discovers they are already near. Scholars still debate the exact daily distances achieved in particular campaigns because chroniclers often exaggerate numbers when describing terror. But even allowing for exaggeration, the operational mobility of Mongol armies remains one of the great military facts of the 13th century. Their diet supports that mobility. Warriors can live for periods on dried meat curds, blood drawn carefully from horses in emergencies, and mares' milk products. They are not free from supply needs, as no army is, but their dependence on fixed grain depots is lower than that of many settled forces. They can disperse to graze their animals and then concentrate for attack. This creates an unnerving rhythm. A Mongol army can seem to dissolve into the landscape, not because it is weak, but because dispersal is part of its strength. Yet the common image of wild horsemen swarming without order is deeply misleading. The Mongol army is disciplined with unusual severity. Units operate according to command structures tied to the decimal organization of tens, hundreds, thousands, and 10,000s. Signals matter. Flags, drums, horns, smoke, and messengers help coordinate movement. In battle, planned withdrawal can be more dangerous than advance. A feigned retreat, one of the classic tactics of steppe warfare, draws an enemy out of position, stretches its lines, breaks its discipline, and turns confidence into exposure. Armies that mistake this maneuver for panic often discover too late that they have left their defensive ground and entered a killing field. The Mongols also excel at intelligence. Before major campaigns, they gather information through merchants, scouts, envoys, captives, defectors, and local rivals. They want to know roads, rivers, harvests, fortifications, political disputes, commanders, markets, and fears. This is one of the less dramatic but most important parts of their success. The arrow that kills in battle may have been prepared by news collected months earlier. A city weakened by faction, a prince resented by his subjects, a frontier garrison. Unpaid, a river ford overlooked by defenders, these details can matter as much as courage. They are also patient learners. When early Mongol forces confront fortified cities, they do not possess all the siege expertise of the civilizations they attack. Steppe warfare alone cannot easily break massive walls, but the Mongols adapt with chilling efficiency. They capture Chinese, Persian, Central Asian, and other engineers. They use catapults, traction, trebuchets, siege towers, mining incendiaries, and later more advanced counterweight machines in different theatres. They move specialists across regions, sometimes sending engineers from one end of the empire to solve problems at the other. This willingness to absorb foreign knowledge is one of the reasons the empire becomes more dangerous over time. It does not remain a steppe army in pure form. It becomes a moving system that collects techniques. The evidence remains incomplete for many battlefield details, and surviving accounts often come from frightened enemies or later admirers. Numbers are especially treacherous. Medieval chroniclers may describe Mongol hosts as unimaginably large, sometimes far beyond logistical possibility. Modern historians tend to reduce these figures, but smaller numbers can make Mongol success more impressive, not less. A compact, disciplined, highly mobile force can defeat a larger army if it controls tempo, information, and terrain. The Mongols often do. Psychology is part of the machine. They cultivate reputation deliberately. Cities that surrender may be spared, taxed, or absorbed. Cities that resist, especially after refusing terms or killing envoys, may face exemplary destruction. The moral horror of this is real, but so is the strategic logic. Terror travels faster than cavalry. A city hearing what happened elsewhere may open its gates without forcing the Mongols into a costly siege. No single explanation fully accounts for each massacre or reprieve, and local circumstances vary widely, but the pattern is clear. Fear is not a side effect of Mongol war. It is often a planned instrument. At the same time, Mongol command rewards flexibility among generals. Leaders such as Subutai become masters of long-range campaigning, coordinating separate columns across vast distances. Subutai's later operations in the West reveal a mind able to think across entire landscapes, not merely battlefields. Armies move like parts of a trap, separated by mountains, rivers, and forests, yet timed to converge. This requires trust communication and an ability to operate without constant instruction from the Khan. The Mongols are centralized in loyalty, but often decentralized in execution, which gives them a dangerous combination of unity and adaptability. A surprising detail lies in their use of maps and geographical knowledge. The popular imagination sometimes pictures nomads as guided only by instinct and stars, but imperial expansion requires accumulated knowledge. Routes are recorded, guides are used and conquered. Administrators help translate unfamiliar lands into usable information. The Mongol world is oral in many habits, but it is not ignorant of record-keeping. As the empire expands, scribes and administrators from conquered peoples become essential. War creates the need for paperwork, even among people who began far from bureaucratic cities. The army is also bound by harsh internal discipline around plunder. Loot is not supposed to be seized randomly before victory is secured and distribution authorized. This matters enormously. Many armies fall apart when soldiers scatter to steal. A force that can delay gratification until the enemy is broken has a severe advantage. The Mongols understand that wealth must strengthen the collective order, not dissolve it. Reward comes often richly, but it comes through command. For enemies, this combination is bewildering. The Mongols may refuse battle when expected, then force battle when least desired. They may retreat for days, then surround. They may divide into small groups, then appear as one. They may offer surrender terms, then punish defiance beyond anything the defenders imagined. They may destroy a city and spare its craftsmen. They may kill a ruler and employ his officials. They may seem barbaric to those they defeat, yet their campaigns reveal planning, engineering, diplomacy, and administrative appetite. The contradiction is only apparent. The Mongols are capable of extraordinary destruction precisely because they are organized. Their strength also depends on the social world behind the warriors. Families, herds, remounts, seasonal movement, and the production of bows, arrows, clothing, tack, and food all sustain military power. Women manage much of the domestic economy that allows men to campaign, and elite women sometimes influence succession alliances and regency. The record often places battles in the foreground and households in shadow, but the empire's mobility rests on both. A rider crossing continents carries with him not only weapons but the labor of a society adapted to movement. As Genghis Khan looks beyond the unified steppe, he possesses something rare, an army that can outrun news, learn from prisoners, coordinate across distance, punish disobedience, exploit fear, and turn conquered skill into Mongol strength. It is not invincible. It can be slowed by climate terrain, disease, politics, succession crises, and the limits of horses and grass. Forests, mountains, tropical heat seas, and fortified agricultural states all pose different problems. Scholars still debate why Mongol success varies so sharply from region to region. But where the conditions suit them, and where opponents misunderstand them, they are devastating. The machine of horse and bow is therefore more than a battlefield style. It is a way of reorganizing the world around movement. Roads become optional. Distance becomes compressed. Intelligence becomes ammunition. Fear becomes a messenger. Siege engineers become portable assets. Defeated enemies become manpower. The steppe, once dismissed by settled observers as empty and poor, reveals itself as a training ground for one of history's most effective imperial systems. The first great tests come along the northern gates of China, where walled cities, bureaucracies, and ancient dynastic traditions stand against a power born from grassland wind and disciplined hunger. There the Mongols will learn that conquest is not only a matter of riding fast and shooting well. To break empires, they must master the art of taking cities, controlling populations, and feeding ambition on a scale even the steppe has not yet seen. South of the steppe, the northern gates of China stand behind walls. Fortified towns, river crossings, garrisons, farms, storehouses, and old imperial habits. To the Mongols, this world is both familiar and strange. It has long been part of frontier life, a place of trade, tribute, raiding, diplomacy, insult, and opportunity. Yet it is also a different kind of power from the one Genghis Khan has just mastered on the grasslands. A steppe rival can be defeated, scattered, absorbed, or hunted across open country. A Chinese-style empire is rooted in fields and cities. It has officials who count grain, scribes who preserve orders, engineers who strengthen walls, and tax systems that continue to function even after one army is beaten. To conquer such a world, the Mongols must become more than the greatest riders of the steppe. Their first major targets are not the Song dynasty of southern China, but the neighbouring states along the northern frontier Western Xia and the Jin dynasty. Western Xia, ruled by the Tanguts, controls a strategic region of deserts, oases, mountains, and trade routes in the northwest. The Jin, ruled by the Eurasians, governs much of northern China, from cities rich in population, grain, metalwork, and administrative experience. These are not weak societies waiting helplessly for invasion. They have armies, fortresses, cavalry traditions of their own, and long experience dealing with steppe threats. But they are also caught in the same old frontier trap. They know nomads as danger, yet they do not fully grasp that Genghis Khan has transformed nomadic war into something more unified, more patient, and more adaptive. The campaigns against Western Xia show the first edges of this transformation. The Tangut state is difficult country for cavalry. Deserts and fortified towns do not yield as easily as open camps. The Mongols raid pressure, withdraw return, and gradually force submission. They demand support, tribute, and military cooperation. Western Xia becomes entangled in Mongol ambitions, sometimes submitting, sometimes resisting, and later paying terribly for hesitation. The details of these early campaigns are not always clear, and scholars still debate the precise sequence of some events, but the larger pattern is unmistakable. Genghis Khan is learning how to use frontier states as both targets and resources. Against the Jin, the challenge grows larger. The Jin dynasty controls cities whose scale must have impressed men raised among felt tents and seasonal camps. The Jin capital region contains walls, markets, workshops, palaces, and dense agricultural wealth. But the Jin state also has vulnerabilities. It rules over a mixed population including Eurasians, Khitans, Chinese, and others, and not all groups are equally loyal. Border commanders may be isolated. Some subject peoples resent Jin rule. The Mongols exploit these divisions with the same instinct they once used among steppe tribes. They do not merely attack walls, they attack relationships. The Great Wall, often imagined as a single unbroken barrier against the north, does not function as an absolute shield. It is a system of fortifications built and rebuilt across centuries, useful only when properly guarded, supplied, and politically supported. The Mongols find passes use defectors, pressure frontier defences, and maneuver through weaknesses. A wall can delay an army, but it cannot by itself solve poor intelligence, divided command, or enemies inside the gate. This is one of the enduring lessons of the Mongol rise. Stone is strong until people fail. Once inside northern China, the Mongols encounter the problem of cities. Here the bow and horse are not enough. Fortified places require siegecraft, negotiation, starvation, engineering, and terror. The Mongols begin using captured specialists more systematically. Chinese and other engineers provide machines and knowledge that can break walls or force defenders into hopeless conditions. The Mongol army becomes less purely Mongol with every success. Its power grows by absorbing the skills of those it defeats. This is a lesser-known but essential truth. The conquest of China helps teach the Mongols how to conquer the rest of Eurasia. The siege of Zhongdu, the Jin capital near modern Beijing, becomes one of the great symbolic moments. The city is not just a military target. It is a statement of settled power, a world of gates, granaries, artisans, officials, and imperial ceremony. The Mongols pressure it relentlessly. The Jin court eventually moves south to Kaifeng, a decision that may have seemed practical, but looked like weakness. Zhongdu falls in 1215 after severe suffering. Accounts of destruction and killing surround the event, though as with many medieval reports, numbers must be treated carefully. The evidence remains incomplete, and chroniclers often shape catastrophe into moral warning. Still, there is no doubt that the fall of Zhongdu announces a new reality. The riders from the steppe can do more than raid the frontier. They can break imperial capitals, yet conquest does not mean instant control. Northern China is too large, too populous, and too administratively complex to be managed by cavalry alone. The Mongols need tax collectors, scribes, translators, and local collaborators. They must decide what to destroy, what to preserve, what to loot immediately, and what to keep producing for future revenue. This is a profound shift. A raider may prefer quick plunder. An empire must learn patience. Genghis Khan and his successors gradually discover that a living city can be more useful than a ruined one. Though this lesson is unevenly applied and often learned through devastation, one surprising detail is the role of defectors from the Jin side, especially Khitans and others, who had their own grievances against Jurchen rule. Some provide military service, administrative knowledge, and guidance through unfamiliar political terrain. This pattern repeats across the Mongol world. The empire expands not only because Mongols defeat outsiders, but because outsiders join them, sometimes willingly, sometimes under pressure, sometimes because the Mongols offer a path upward against old masters. Every empire creates enemies within itself. The Mongols are unusually skilled at finding them. The northern Chinese campaigns also reveal the limits of old categories like barbarian and civilized. Jin officials may describe the Mongols as savage, and the destruction they bring can be savage indeed. But the Mongols are watching, learning, counting, and adapting. They take siege engineers. They use administrators. They study tribute systems. They understand that population and production can be converted into military power. Meanwhile, the settled states, for all their written records and bureaucratic sophistication, often misread the political revolution on the steppe. Civilization does not guarantee strategic imagination. Genghis Khan's relationship with Chinese religious and intellectual figures also complicates the picture. He shows interest in advisors who can offer counsel longevity practices, administrative ideas, or moral framing, though he remains above all a conqueror. The Taoist master Qiu Chuji famously travels to meet him, and while later traditions shape the encounter in different ways, it suggests that the Mongol ruler is curious about more than plunder. He seeks useful knowledge wherever it can be found. What survives in the record suggests a man who respects skill and insight when they serve power, even if he has little interest in becoming a conventional Chinese emperor. Still, the wars in northern China are brutal. Agricultural communities suffer from raids, sieges, conscription, and displacement. Fields are burned or abandoned. Local populations must navigate impossible choices between loyalty, survival, and submission. Some towns surrender to avoid annihilation. Others resist and pay heavily. No single explanation fully accounts for Mongol violence in these campaigns. It is strategic, punitive, opportunistic, and sometimes uncontrolled. It reflects both deliberate policy and the harsh momentum of conquest. To speak only of Mongol efficiency is to miss the human cost. To speak only of destruction is to miss the adaptive intelligence that made the destruction so effective. The Jin dynasty does not fall immediately. It survives for years after Zhongdu shifting southward, trying to regroup and fighting on, until its final collapse in 1234 after Genghis Khan's death. But the balance has changed. The Mongols now possess experience against a major sedentary state. They have learned to combine steppe mobility with siege methods. They have gained access to Chinese wealth engineers and administrative practices. They have shown that walls and capitals can fail. Most importantly, they have discovered that conquering settled empires requires turning conquered people into instruments of further conquest. Western Sia's fate becomes darker. After years of uneasy submission and resistance, Genghis Khan launches a final campaign against it in the 1220s. The Tangut state is destroyed, and its historical memory is badly damaged, though not erased completely. Manuscripts, art inscriptions, and ruins survive enough to remind the present that Western Sia was more than a footnote in Mongol history. Scholars still debate aspects of its final destruction, including the scale and intent of cultural erasure, but the result is clear: one of the sophisticated states of Inner Asia disappears as an independent power. The Mongol Empire does not merely redraw borders, it can extinguish states so thoroughly that later centuries struggle to hear their voices. By the time Genghis Khan turns westward, the campaigns in China have already changed his empire. The Mongols are no longer only a united steppe people testing their strength against neighbours. They are becoming an imperial force with access to siegecraft scribes, revenue, and a widening vision of what conquest can yield. The frontier that once separated grassland and city has been crossed in both directions. Mongol armies enter Chinese lands, but Chinese techniques enter Mongol war. The empire is becoming hybrid, and that hybridity makes it far more dangerous. The northern gates have broken, but the story does not remain there. Far to the west, another powerful world is rising across deserts and trade cities, rich from commerce, proud of its armies, and confident in its own authority. The Khwarezmian Empire stretches across Central Asia and Persia, sitting astride routes that connect east and west. It might have become a trading partner. It might have become a buffer. Instead, through mistrust, arrogance, and a chain of fatal decisions, it becomes the next great door the Mongols will force open. West of the Mongolian steppe lies a world of caravan cities, irrigated fields, desert roads, libraries, mosques, markets, and rulers who measure power through tax, trade, and armies, stationed across ancient lands. Central Asia is not a blank space between China and the Islamic world. It is one of the great crossroads of human history where merchants carry silk, silver glass, spices, paper horses, slaves, stories, and technologies from one civilization to another. Cities such as Bukhara, Samarkand, Urgench, Nishapur and Otrar are not merely dots on a map. They are living nodes in a vast commercial and intellectual web built over centuries by Persian, Turkic, Islamic and older local traditions. The Khwarezmian Empire stands across much of this world in the early 13th century. Under Shah Muhammad II, it has expanded rapidly, but rapid expansion does not always mean stable power. Its territories include diverse peoples, ambitious governors, military elites, and cities with their own interests. The Shah commands wealth and armies, but his empire is not held together with the same hardened discipline that Genghis Khan has forced upon the steppe. What survives in the record suggests a state impressive in size yet brittle in loyalty, powerful enough to provoke confidence, but not unified enough to absorb the shock that is coming. At first, war between the Mongols and Khwarezm is not inevitable. Genghis Khan appears interested in trade and diplomatic contact. This should not be surprising. Conquerors need merchants. The Mongols understand the value of long-distance exchange information, luxury goods, and skilled intermediaries. A trade relationship with Khwarezm could enrich both sides and open routes across Eurasia. But the frontier between suspicion and opportunity is thin. At Otrar, a caravan associated with the Mongols is seized by the local governor who accuses its members of spying. They are killed and their goods are taken. Genghis Khan sends envoys demanding redress. The Shah responds with fatal contempt. One envoy is reportedly executed and others are humiliated. The details come through sources shaped by later memory and moral judgment, so scholars still debate exact responsibility and sequence. Was the caravan truly a commercial mission, an intelligence operation, or both? Did the governor act alone, or with the Shah's approval? Did Muhammad II misunderstand the scale of Mongol power, or did he believe he had no choice but to show strength? No single explanation fully accounts for the disaster. But in Mongol political culture, the killing of envoys is not a small insult. It is a direct attack on the order Genghis Khan is building. Messengers are the nerves of empire. To kill them is to declare oneself outside acceptable negotiation. The Mongol response is devastating. Around 1219, Genghis Khan launches a campaign into Khwarezmian territory that shows how much the Mongol war machine has matured since its early steppe struggles. This is not a simple frontal invasion along one predictable road. Mongol forces move in coordinated columns crossing deserts and mountain routes that defenders do not expect. They exploit intelligence speed and the political divisions of the Khwarezmian state. The Shah disperses his forces among cities, rather than concentrating them in the field, perhaps hoping fortified centres can wear the Mongols down. Against another enemy, this might have worked. Against an army that has learned siegecraft and psychological war, it exposes each city to isolation. Otrar falls after resistance. Bukhara is taken. Samarkand, one of the jewels of the Islamic world, follows. The names carry a weight that later centuries can still feel. These are not obscure fortresses. They are places of learning trade, faithcraft, and memory. Their fall sends a signal across the region that the balance of power has broken. Accounts describe massacres, enslavement, deportation of artisans, and the separation of useful specialists from doomed populations. As always with medieval numbers, caution is necessary. Chroniclers may inflate death tolls into the hundreds of thousands or more, sometimes beyond what cities could realistically contain. Yet reducing impossible numbers does not soften the historical reality. The destruction is immense. A lesser-known but crucial feature of the campaign is the Mongol use of local labour and captives in siege operations. Conquered populations may be forced to fill moats, carry materials, build works, or serve as human shields. Skilled artisans and engineers are selected for preservation and relocation. The empire consumes cities and parts, manpower, knowledge, wealth, animals, women, children, administrators, and terror. What cannot be used may be discarded. This is conquest as sorting, and it is one of the coldest features of Mongol expansion. Shah Muhammad II fails to become the rallying centre his empire needs. He flees westward, pursued by Mongol generals Jebe and Subutai, in one of the most extraordinary chase operations of the age. Across Iran and toward the Caspian, the Shah's authority dissolves. He eventually dies in isolation on an island in the Caspian Sea, a ruler of vast lands reduced to flight and fever. His son Jalal al-Din continues resistance with courage and skill, even defeating Mongol forces at Parwan, but he cannot reverse the larger collapse. Genghis Khan defeats him near the Indus, and Jalal al-Din escapes into a future of exile, warfare, and diminishing possibilities. The campaign does more than destroy a dynasty. It tears open the centre of Eurasia. The Mongols now stand deep in the Islamic world, connected to Persian bureaucratic traditions, Central Asian commerce, and routes leading toward the Caucasus, Rus, and the Middle East. The westward movement also reveals the Mongols' ability to pursue enemies across unfamiliar landscapes without losing cohesion. Jebe and Subutai's reconnaissance beyond the Caspian becomes almost a rehearsal for later invasions of the Western Steppe and Europe. They do not merely chase, they map possibilities. The human consequences are profound. Irrigation systems are damaged in some regions, though the scale and permanence of destruction varied from place to place and remains debated. Some cities recover over time, others never regain former prominence. Populations are displaced. Scholars, craftsmen, and merchants are killed, enslaved, relocated, or absorbed into Mongol service. The evidence remains incomplete, and modern historians continue to argue over how much of Central Asia's later decline should be attributed directly to Mongol violence, how much to pre-existing environmental and political pressures, and how much to later developments. What is certain is that the invasion marks a rupture. The old urban world of Transoxiana and Khorasan survives but wounded and transformed. There is also a grim irony. The Mongols, often described as destroyers of trade cities, are drawn west partly by the logic of trade itself. The insult at Otrar begins with a caravan. The war that follows shatters cities that had long lived from movement across distance. Yet after the devastation, Mongol rule will eventually help reopen and secure some of those same routes on an even larger imperial scale. Violence breaks the network. Empire later tries to profit from reconnecting it. This paradox will become one of the defining features of Mongol world history. By the end of the Khwarezmian campaign, Genghis Khan is no longer a regional conqueror pressing against China and Inner Asia. He has broken one of the major powers of the Islamic East and shown that his armies can operate across deserts, cities, mountains and river systems far from Mongolia. The world has changed shape. The distance between East Asia and the Middle East has narrowed under hoofbeats. Rulers far beyond the immediate battlefield begin to hear reports that sound exaggerated until refugees, merchants, and ruined cities confirm them. The Mongols have crossed from steppe empire into world empire. But the farther they move, the more they face a question that will follow them everywhere. How much should be destroyed to make obedience certain, and how much must be preserved to make conquest useful? In Central Asia, the answer is written in ashes, tribute lists, emptied neighbourhoods, surviving workshops, and roads that still carry news of terror faster than any army can ride. When the Mongols reach a city, the first weapon may not be an arrow or a stone from a siege engine, it may be a message. The demand is usually simple in structure, even if the consequences behind it are immense. Submit, provide, tribute. Open the gates, accept Mongol authority, and live under the new order. Resist, deceive, kill envoys, or rebel after submission and face destruction. This pattern does not unfold identically everywhere, and local commanders make different choices in different circumstances, but the moral atmosphere around Mongol war becomes unmistakable. The city is forced to imagine its own future before the first wall is breached. For urban societies across Central Asia, Persia, northern China, and later elsewhere, this is a terrible kind of decision. To surrender may feel like dishonor, treason, or religious failure. It may mean handing over wealth hostages, animals, weapons craftsmen, and political independence. It may mean trusting invaders whose reputation grows darker with every refugee story. But resistance is worse if the city cannot hold. The Mongols deliberately make examples of places that defy them, especially when they believe oaths have been broken or envoys killed. Terror becomes a military technology as real in its effects as the bow or the siege tower. The destruction of cities such as Merv-Nishapur and Urgench becomes central to the memory of Mongol conquest. Medieval accounts describe death on a scale so vast that the numbers strain belief. Some chroniclers speak in hundreds of thousands or even millions figures that modern historians treat with caution, because they may reflect literary horror more than census reality. Yet caution is not denial. The evidence remains incomplete, but archaeological traces, textual accounts, demographic disruption, and the sheer consistency of reports across regions suggest episodes of catastrophic killing, enslavement, and urban devastation. The exact numbers may be debated. The terror is not. Merv offers one of the most haunting examples. Once among the great cities of the Islamic East, rich in gardens, canals, libraries, scholars, and trade, it becomes a symbol of sudden ruin. The city had lived from irrigation, learning, and commerce, a place where human labour had made the desert bloom. Under Mongol assault and punishment, its population is slaughtered or scattered according to later sources. Some specialists are separated out, others vanish into the machinery of conquest. Scholars still debate the scale of the massacre and how quickly or whether the city recovered in different forms, but Merv's name becomes attached to one of the darkest shadows of the Mongol age. Nishapur carries another layer of memory. After a Mongol commander, a son-in-law of Genghis Khan, is killed, the city is punished with extreme violence. Later accounts claim even animals were killed, a detail that may be partly rhetorical, meant to express total devastation. Still, such stories reveal the psychological world the Mongols create. Whether every detail is literal or shaped by grief and warning, the message is clear. Resistance can bring not defeat alone, but erasure. In a world where cities rely on reputation, trade, and continuity, the idea of being turned into a warning is almost as terrifying as death itself. Urgench, capital of Khwarezm, presents a different but equally revealing case. Built in a region of canals and river channels near the Amudarya, it is wealthy, proud, and difficult to take. The fighting there is bitter. The Mongols, whose strength lies in mobility, must fight street by street in an urban environment that favours defenders. Tensions among Mongol princes may have complicated the siege, and sources suggest disputes over command and plunder. No single explanation fully accounts for the destruction that follows, but the city suffers terribly. Water systems may have been damaged or deliberately broken, and the urban landscape is shattered. The conquest of Urgench shows that Mongol victory is not always swift or effortless. Sometimes it's grinding, costly, and made more savage by frustration. Yet the Mongols do not destroy every city. This is essential to understand. Their violence is selective, strategic, and often conditional even when it is extreme. Cities that surrender early may be spared large-scale slaughter, though they still face tribute, requisition, deportation, and humiliation. Artisans, engineers, physicians, scribes, translators, and merchants are often preserved because they are useful. The Mongols are not trying to empty the world for its own sake. They are trying to dominate it. Destruction serves obedience. Preservation serves revenue and future conquest. This is where the simple image of the Mongols as only destroyers begins to fail, not because they are less brutal than remembered, but because their brutality operates within a political logic. They can massacre a population and carefully save metalworkers. They can burn neighborhoods and protect merchants. They can punish rebellion with annihilation, and then use surviving administrators to collect taxes. The contradiction is disturbing because it is not madness. It is empire. For the people inside threatened cities, uncertainty becomes part of the horror. No one can know exactly how the Mongols will interpret surrender, delay, negotiation, or resistance. A governor's decision may doom ordinary families. A faction inside the walls may open a gate. A previous act of defiance may be remembered. A rumour of hidden wealth may provoke torture or further violence. A useful craft may save one person while his neighbours are killed. In this atmosphere, survival can depend on skills, timing, chance, and the calculations of commanders who see human beings as resources, obstacles, or examples. The Mongols also use deportation as a tool of empire. Skilled workers are moved across vast distances. A craftsman from Central Asia may end up serving in Mongolia or China. Chinese siege engineers may be sent west. Persian administrators may later serve Mongol rulers. Musicians, doctors, weavers, armourers, and scribes are redistributed like precious instruments. This forced movement spreads knowledge, but not gently. Behind the later story of Eurasian exchange lies a landscape of captives uprooted from homes, languages, graves, and familiar skies. There is lesser-known consequence in the fate of books and scholars. Some centres of learning suffer grievously. Libraries may be burned, dispersed, or neglected. Scholars are killed or flee. But knowledge also travels through refugees and captives. Persian bureaucratic culture, Islamic astronomy, Chinese medicine, Uyghur script traditions, and Central Asian commercial expertise all move through Mongol networks in uneven ways. The empire destroys institutions in one place and carries fragments of them elsewhere. What survives in the record suggests not a simple darkness falling over Eurasia, but a violent redistribution of human skill and memory. Fear travels ahead of the armies. Refugees carry news. Merchants repeat it in markets. Rulers receive reports that seem too terrible to trust. Some stories grow in the telling because terror always does, but exaggeration itself becomes useful to the Mongols. If a city believes resistance means total death, the army may win without fighting. The Mongols understand that reputation can reduce costs. Every spared city and every ruined city becomes part of the same message. Obedience may preserve life. Defiance may erase it. The moral question remains heavy. To explain the strategic logic of terror is not to excuse it. The Mongol Empire's rise brings suffering on a scale that cannot be softened by later benefits of trade or communication. Entire communities are broken. Families are separated. Irrigation works fall silent. Local histories are interrupted so violently that later historians must reconstruct them through scattered remains. The evidence remains incomplete in many places precisely because the violence damaged the records by which the victims might have spoken. And yet the cities are not merely passive victims. Some resist fiercely, some negotiate, some elites betray rivals, some local populations join the Mongols against hated rulers, some administrators survive by serving the new order, some religious leaders seek accommodation, some craftsmen endure captivity and continue their work in distant lands. Human beings inside the storm make choices, though often under conditions so constrained that choice itself becomes a cruel word. The Mongol approach to cities reveals one of the central paradoxes of their empire. They come from a world where wealth is mobile herds, horses, followers, weapons, tents. They conquer a world where wealth is fixed canals, walls, orchards, workshops, archives. At first, fixed wealth can look like plunder waiting to be taken, but gradually the Mongols learn that the greatest value of a city may lie in keeping it alive. This lesson is uneven, resisted by some, embraced by others, and shaped by local advisors. Over time, Mongol rulers become patrons of cities as well as destroyers of them. But in the age of conquest, the balance often tips toward devastation. The memory of this violence becomes part of the world history itself. In Persian chronicles, Russian tales, Chinese records, Armenian histories, and later European imagination, the Mongols appear as a force that tests the meaning of civilization. Are walls enough? Are kings enough? Are prayers enough? The answer for many who watch the smoke rise seemed to be no, but beneath the terror lies another transformation. By breaking so many political barriers, the Mongols also open routes that had been fragmented by rival states. The same empire that turned cities into warnings will soon make it possible for envoys, merchants, monks, and knowledge to cross Eurasia with unusual reach. The road across continents is being paved in part with ruins. That is the uncomfortable truth at the centre of the Mongol century. The empire connects the world not through peace alone, and not through destruction alone, but through a sequence in which terror clears paths that administration later tries to secure. The ashes of Merv and the markets of future Mongol trade belong to the same story, however difficult it is to hold them together. The world is being wounded into connection. After the fires of conquest, the roads begin to change. At first, the change is almost invisible beneath the smoke. A traveller moving through Central Asia after the Mongol invasions would not immediately speak of connection or exchange. He would see abandoned fields, frightened towns, tribute demands, scattered families and cities still measuring their dead. Yet empires do not live by destruction alone. Once the Mongols break the powers that stand between East and West, they face the enormous task of making distance usable. The same armies that turned routes into corridors of fear begin to turn them into arteries of rule. The Mongol Empire stretches across lands that had long been connected in fragments: China to Inner Asia to Transoxiana Persia, to the Caucasus, the steppe to Rus, and eventually to the edges of Europe and the Middle East. Merchants had crossed parts of this world for centuries before the Mongols. Buddhist monks, Muslim traders, Christian envoys, Jewish merchants, Turkic warriors, Persian scholars and Chinese artisans had all moved along older networks. The Mongols do not invent Eurasian exchange. What they do is bring vast sections of it under one imperial umbrella, at least for a time reducing some political barriers while imposing new dangers and obligations. The key to this connected world is not only conquest but communication. The Mongols develop and expand a relay system often known as the Yam. Across the empire, stations provide fresh horses, food, shelter and support for authorized messengers and travelers. A courier carrying imperial orders can move with astonishing speed, changing mounts along the way, and passing through landscapes that would exhaust ordinary travelers. This system has roots in earlier steppe and Chinese practices, but under Mongol rule it becomes one of the great infrastructures of empire. It is the nervous system of a realm too large for any ruler to see. Through the Yam commands move tax information, moves military intelligence moves, and diplomatic messages move. The empire's size makes communication essential. A Khan in Mongolia, northern China, or later, a capital city cannot govern distant princes and administrators by memory alone. He needs reports, seals, documents, envoys, and roads that can carry authority across mountains, deserts, and rivers. The evidence remains incomplete for the exact functioning of the system in every region, and it changes over time, but what survives in records from China-Persia and travellers' accounts suggests a remarkable logistical achievement. The Mongols turn movement into administration. Merchants become especially important. Genghis Khan and his successors value trade not as a gentle ideal but as a source of wealth, information and prestige goods. They support merchant associations, sometimes giving them capital or official protection, in exchange for supplying the court with luxury goods and financial services. Muslim merchants in particular play a major role across many Mongol domains, carrying textiles, metals, medicines, spices, and news. Some grow wealthy under Mongol patronage. Others suffer under the burdens of taxation requisition or political instability. No single explanation fully accounts for the experience of merchants across the empire, because conditions vary sharply by region and decade. Still, long-distance trade gains new possibilities under the broad shelter of Mongol power. This is the world later associated with the phrase Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace. The phrase can mislead if taken too softly. It does not mean the empire becomes peaceful in a moral sense, or that conquered peoples forget the massacres that opened the roads. It means that within certain zones and periods, Mongol authority makes long-distance travel safer than it had been under many competing states. A merchant with proper documents may cross enormous distances. An envoy can pass from Europe toward the court of the Khan. A missionary can move east. A craftsman can be transported west. A disease can travel too, though that darker consequence waits in the shadows of the same road. One of the most striking details is the use of passports or tablets of authority, often called paisa. These metal or wooden tablets identify the bearer as someone travelling under imperial permission. The tablet can command support from local officials and relay stations. In practice, abuse occurs. Too many privileged travellers can burden local populations forced to provide animals food or lodging. What looks like efficient infrastructure from the centre may feel like extraction in a village that must feed passing officials. Scholars still debate how heavily the yam system strained different regions, but it is clear that imperial movement has costs. Roads are never neutral. Someone maintains them, feeds them, and pays for them. Diplomacy also expands through Mongol roads. European rulers and popes send envoys east seeking information, alliance, or conversion possibilities. Franciscan travellers such as John of Plano Carpini and William of Rewrote journey to Mongol courts and return with accounts that reshape European knowledge of Asia. Their writings are limited by their assumptions and religious aims, yet they provide extraordinary glimpses into Mongol political life, court ritual, geography, and the diversity of peoples under Mongol rule. Europe, which once knew the steppe largely through fear and rumour, begins to gather more detailed information, even if misunderstanding remains common. From the other direction, knowledge travels westward in forms both obvious and subtle. Paper money printing traditions, gunpowder technologies, medical knowledge, astronomical ideas, and artistic motifs move through Mongol-era channels, though the paths are complex and often debated. It is too simple to say the Mongols single-handedly brought these things to Europe. Many had earlier routes, intermediaries, and independent developments, but the Mongol period accelerates contact across Eurasia and creates conditions in which technologies and ideas can travel farther and faster. What survives in the record suggests a world becoming more aware of its own breadth. Artisans are among the most important travellers, though many do not travel freely. The Mongols relocate skilled people as imperial assets. Chinese craftsmen may work in Central Asia. Persian astronomers may serve in China. Metal workers, weavers, doctors, scribes, and engineers are moved according to the needs of rulers. This forced circulation is one of the empire's most uncomfortable forms of exchange. Later achievements in art, science, and administration sometimes rest on captivity. The empire connects cultures, but often by uprooting individuals from the places that formed them. Religious communities also travel these roads. Buddhists, Muslims, Christians, Taoists, and others seek influence at Mongol courts. The Khans often show pragmatic tolerance, inviting or permitting religious specialists to pray, debate, advise, heal, calculate auspicious times, or lend legitimacy. This tolerance has limits and varies by ruler and region, but compared with many states of the period, Mongol elites often display a striking willingness to engage multiple traditions. They are less interested in doctrinal purity than in spiritual power, political usefulness, and cosmic legitimacy. Eternal heaven may stand above the Khan's authority, but many earthly religious specialists can still serve the empire. The roads also carry language and writing. The Yeger script becomes important in Mongol administration. Persian becomes a major language of governance in the Western Khanates. Chinese bureaucratic forms influence rule in East Asia. Translators become indispensable. In an empire of many tongues, translation is not a luxury. It is a political technology. A command misunderstood may become rebellion. A treaty mistranslated may become war. A tax order must pass from the language of the conqueror into the language of the farmer who must pay it. The Mongol world depends on people who can move between speech communities as surely as horsemen move between valleys. A lesser-known dimension of this connectivity is the movement of geographical imagination. Before the Mongol century, many civilizations knew parts of the wider world through trade and rumor, but the scale of direct contact expands. Chinese sources gain information about lands farther west. Islamic geographers incorporate new knowledge from Mongol domains. Europeans begin to imagine Asia not merely as a biblical or legendary space, but as a political world filled with rulers, roads, cities, and peoples. The map in the mind changes before maps on parchment fully catch up, yet this connected world remains fragile. The Mongol Empire is not a single smooth machine. It is a family empire divided among branches descended from Genghis Khan. Rivalry, succession disputes, regional interests, and cultural differences complicate every road. A merchant may pass safely in one decade and face danger in another. A war between Khanates can interrupt trade. A local official may abuse authority. A relay station may be underfunded. The idea of a perfectly peaceful Silk Road under Mongol rule is more legend than reality. But the increase in movement is real enough to alter world history. The most famous traveller associated with this era, Marco Polo, belongs to this wider pattern, though his account has long been debated in details. Whether every story he tells is accepted or questioned, his narrative reflects a world in which a Venetian merchant family can imagine travelling to the court of Kublai Khan and returning with tales of China, paper money, coal postal stations, and imperial wealth. The very possibility of such a journey reveals how Mongol power has narrowed the psychological distance between Europe and East Asia. The world has not become small, but it has become more traversable. This is one of the great contradictions of the Mongol Empire. The roads opened because armies first closed the futures of countless people. The same relay stations that carry envoys also carry orders for taxation and war. The same trade routes that bring silk and spices also move captives and disease. The same tolerance that allows religious exchange can coexist with ruthless punishment of rebellion. No single moral summary can hold all of it. The Mongols rewrite world history not by being simply destroyers or simply connectors, but by forcing destruction and connection into the same imperial system. As the roads lengthen, the empire grows harder to hold together. Messages can travel faster than before, but not instantly. Princes command their own territories. Generals gain local power. Conquered civilizations begin to shape their conquerors. Wealth from China, Persia, and the steppe pulls different branches of the ruling family in different directions. Genghis Khan has built a unity strong enough to break continents open, but after his death that unity must survive ambition, distance, and inheritance. The roads across continents carry more than goods and orders. They carry the first signs that an empire this vast may be too large to remain one empire forever. Genghis Khan dies in 1227, and the empire does not collapse. That fact alone tells how deeply his work has changed the steppe. Many conquerors build power around their own body, their own voice, their own fearsome presence. When they die, their followers divide, the horses settle old scores and watch the structure fall apart. The Mongol Empire is vulnerable to all of that, yet it survives because Genghis Khan has left more than memory. He has left a ruling family, a military order, a law-bound expectation of obedience, and a hunger for expansion that has become almost institutional. The storm has lost its first centre, but it has not lost its wind. Succession is never simple among the Mongols. The empire belongs to the house of Genghis Khan, but inheritance must be negotiated among sons, brothers, widows, commanders, and the wider aristocracy. His sons by Berta carry special legitimacy, Yochi, Chagatai, Ogedei, and Tolui. Each line has claims, territories, followers, and rivalries. Yochi the eldest has already died before his father, and questions around his birth after Berta's abduction by the Merkits linger in the political background. Chagatai is forceful but divisive. Tolui is able and close to the central Mongol homeland. Ogedei, chosen as successor, becomes the compromise and the bridge. Ogedei Khan's reign shows that the empire can move from charismatic conquest toward imperial administration without losing its appetite for war. He is often remembered as generous, fond of drinking, and less personally severe than his father, but under him the Mongol expansion continues on a vast scale. Karakoram grows as an imperial centre, not a city like the ancient capitals of China or Persia, but a symbolic and administrative heart on the steppe. Artisans from conquered lands work there. Envoys arrive. Goods from distant regions gather. The Mongols, once defined by mobility, begin to create fixed centres of power, even if their political imagination remains deeply tied to movement. The empire under Ogedei pushes in multiple directions at once. In northern China, the Jin dynasty finally falls in 1234, crushed between Mongol pressure and alliance with the southern Song. This victory completes the destruction of a major state that had once seemed capable of containing steppe threats. Yet it also creates a new problem. The Mongols now border the Song, a wealthy, densely populated, highly sophisticated dynasty in southern China, protected by river cities, infantry armies, naval forces, and a landscape less suited to pure cavalry war. The conquest of China is not finished. It is entering a harder phase. To the west, the Mongol gaze turns toward the lands associated with Yochi's line. The western steppe, the Volga region, the Caucasus, and the principalities of Rus come into focus. These campaigns are led by Batu Yoshi's son, with the brilliant General Subutai playing a central role. The invasion that follows is not a chaotic raid, but one of the most carefully organized long-distance operations of the Middle Ages. Mongol armies cross forests, rivers, and winter landscapes far from the open grasslands of Mongolia. They adapt again. Snow and frozen rivers which might seem obstacles can become roads. The Rus principalities are politically divided. Kiev, Vladimir Suzdal, Ryazan, Novgorod, and other centres do not act as one unified state. Rivalries among princes weaken coordinated defence. The Mongols exploit this fragmentation with the same ruthless intelligence they used against steppe tribes, the Jin and Khwarezm. Cities fall one by one. Ryazan is destroyed. Vladimir burns. Kiev, once a major centre of the Eastern Slavic world, is taken in 1240 after fierce resistance. Later accounts describe terrible slaughter and ruin. As always, numbers must be handled carefully, but the devastation is real. The political world of Rus is transformed. The Mongols do not settle all these lands in the same way they occupy parts of China or Central Asia. Instead, the western domains develop into what later becomes known as the Golden Horde, a Khanat that rules through tribute oversight, military pressure, and alliances with local princes. The Rus principalities are not erased, but they are subordinated. Their rulers must seek patents of authority from the Khan. Tribute flows, political habits change. Some historians have argued that Mongol rule deeply shaped the later development of Muscovy and Russian autocracy, while others caution against making the Mongols responsible for every later feature of Russian political culture. Scholars still debate the degree and nature of this influence, but no serious account can ignore the Mongol impact. For generations, the steppe becomes central to the politics of northeastern Europe. Under Ögedei, Mongol power also presses into Korea, where the Goryeo kingdom resists through years of hardship, before eventually becoming a vassal and partner through marriage alliances and political compromise. The Korean campaigns show again that Mongol conquest is not a single model repeated everywhere. Islands, mountains, court politics, and local resistance shape outcomes. Goryeo suffers deeply, yet its dynasty survives in altered form. The empire can destroy states, but it can also bind them into dependency. The administration of the empire becomes more complex as it expands. Tax farming, census taking, tribute assessment, and the management of conquered populations become urgent. Here the Mongols rely heavily on non-Mongol officials, Uyghurs, Khitans, Chinese Persians, Muslims from Central Asia and others. One surprising figure is Yelu Chukai, a Khitan advisor who serves the Mongols in northern China and argues, according to later tradition, that living populations produce more wealth through taxation than dead ones do through plunder. The exact details of his influence are debated, and later historians may have elevated him into a civilizing symbol, but the principle he represents is crucial. The Mongols must learn that empire is more profitable than destruction when people are allowed to keep producing. Still, this learning is uneven. Taxation can be harsh, inconsistent, and exploitative. Local populations may suffer from multiple demands by princes' officials, military units, and merchants with privileges. Imperial administration is not automatically orderly just because it is written down. The empire's greatness creates opportunities for abuse. A command from the centre may become a burden in the hands of local agents. What survives in the record suggests both real administrative innovation and real suffering under extraction. The ruling family itself is a source of strength and danger. Genghis Khan's descendants share sacred prestige, but they also compete. The empire is imagined as the inheritance of the family divided into appanages, yet held together by the authority of the great Khan. This works while expansion provides wealth, and while major decisions can be confirmed through assemblies and elite consensus. But distance and ambition grow. A prince ruling in the West develops interests different from one ruling in China or Central Asia. The same roads that connect the empire also reveal how far apart its centres have become. Ögedei's death in 1241 exposes this tension. At that moment, Mongol armies are deep in Europe, having defeated forces in Poland and Hungary. Then news of the great Khan's death requires leading princes to return or consider succession politics. The Western campaign slows and withdraws. Europe, already shaken, is spared further immediate invasion. Whether the death of Ögedei alone saved Europe remains debated. Logistics, pasture, political goals, and strategic priorities also mattered. But the timing is undeniable. A death in the imperial center changes the fate of kingdoms thousands of miles away. This is the empire after Genghis, still expanding, still terrifying, but increasingly shaped by the problem of governing distance. Under Ogedei, the Mongols prove that their power is not a one-generation accident. They destroy the Jin, dominate Rus, pressure, courier, expand administration, and prepare future campaigns. Yet the seeds of fragmentation are already visible. Every conquest creates new wealth, and every new wealth creates new rivalries. Every road strengthens imperial reach, and every distant province gives a prince a base of his own. The empire has become too large to be only a steppe confederation, but not yet stable enough to be a single settled monarchy. It is something stranger, a family empire stretched across continents held together by fear, law, profit, memory, and the prestige of a dead founder whose name still commands obedience. The next great shock will come in Europe, where kings and knights suddenly discover that the riders from the east are not legend, not rumour, and not a distant problem belonging to someone else. The edge of the known world is about to feel the hoofbeats. Europe hears the Mongols before it understands them. Reports arrive in fragments carried by merchants, refugees, clerics, envoys, and terrified survivors from the eastern frontiers. Some accounts sound impossible. Cities fall too quickly, armies vanish, princes are killed or forced into submission. Riders appear from lands so distant that many Europeans have only vague ideas of their geography. At first, the Mongols seem less like a political force than a judgment moving across the edge of the map. Yet they are not myth, and they are not moving blindly. They are following roads of grass intelligence, tribute, and command, and the divided kingdoms of Europe are about to learn what Rus and Khwarezm have already learned. After the fall of Kiev in 1240, Mongol forces under Batu and Subutai push farther west. Their campaign is often described as a sudden invasion of Europe, but it is also the western extension of a steppe strategy aimed at securing the lands of the Kipchaks and punishing those who shelter enemies or resist submission. The Kingdom of Hungary becomes a major target, partly because some Cumans fleeing Mongol pressure have sought refuge there. King Bela IV accepts them, hoping to strengthen his own military position, but their arrival creates tension with Hungarian nobles and townspeople. The Mongols interpret such refuge through the hard logic of imperial authority. People they consider subjects or enemies cannot simply escape beyond a border and become someone else's problem. The campaign unfolds on multiple fronts with frightening coordination. One Mongol force moves into Poland, another toward Hungary, while others secure surrounding routes. This is not merely raiding. It is strategic dispersal designed to prevent enemies from uniting. In Poland, a European army meets the Mongols at Legnica in 1241. Duke Henry II of Silesia leads a mixed force of Polish troops, German knights, and others. The battle becomes famous not because it is the largest of the age, but because it reveals the vulnerability of European heavy cavalry when facing an enemy that refuses to fight by expected rules. The Mongols use mobility missiles, smoke confusion, and possibly feigned retreat to break cohesion. Henry is killed. The shock travels westward faster than clear information. In Hungary, the larger disaster comes at Mohi also in 1241. King Bela's forces camp near the Sajo River, trying to hold against the invaders. The Mongols study the position carefully. They cross the river, use siege engines and tactical maneuver, and strike with coordination that turns the Hungarian camp into a trap. European knights and soldiers fight with courage, but courage cannot repair a broken formation. The Mongols surround, pressure, and cut escape routes. The Hungarian army is shattered. Bela flees. The kingdom lies exposed. The aftermath in Hungary is severe. Mongol forces spread across the plain, devastating settlements, seizing supplies, killing and capturing populations, and testing fortifications. Some stone castles and fortified places hold out better than open towns, a detail that later matters deeply. Hungary's landscape with its pasture and open areas is more suitable to Mongol cavalry than many parts of Western Europe. Yet even here the invaders face problems of supply resistance and distance. The evidence remains incomplete, and medieval accounts often magnify horror through religious language, but the destruction is unmistakable. For those who survive, the invasion is not a distant military episode. It is a year of hiding hunger flight and watching familiar communities disappear. Europe's response is fragmented. The papacy worries about the meaning of the invasion and the possibility of wider catastrophe. Some imagine the Mongols in apocalyptic terms. Others try to identify them through older legends, confusing them with peoples from biblical or classical geography. Kings and princes face their own rivalries and limitations. The Holy Roman Empire is divided by political conflict. France and England are far away and occupied with their own concerns. There is no unified European defence because there is no unified Europe. This is one of the reasons the Mongols succeed. So often they encounter political worlds that speak of Christendom, Islam dynasty or civilization, but act through divided interests. And yet the Mongols do not continue into the heart of Europe. This fact has produced centuries of speculation. Some older explanations give almost all credit to the death of Ögedei Khan in December 1241, which draws Mongol princes back toward the succession struggle. There is truth in this. Batu and other leaders cannot ignore imperial politics. The choice of the next great Khan matters to every branch of the family. But scholars still debate whether Europe was spared solely by Ögedei's death. Logistics also matter. The farther west the Mongols move, the more they face unfamiliar terrain, denser fortifications, limited pasture in some regions, and the challenge of holding lands less naturally connected to the steppe. The evidence remains incomplete, and no single explanation fully accounts for the withdrawal. The Mongols may also have judged that tribute and domination of the steppe frontier mattered more than permanent occupation deep in Western Europe. Their empire is not driven by curiosity alone. It seeks submission, resources, and strategic security. Hungary is ravaged. Poland is struck. Europe is frightened, and the Mongols gather immense information. But the death of the great Khan changes priorities at the crucial moment. The storm pulls back, leaving behind ruined fields and unanswered questions. For Europeans, the psychological impact is enormous. The Mongols have defeated armies that believed themselves strong. They have shown that armoured knights, castles, and Christian kingship are not automatic protections. The invasion forces Europe to look east with new seriousness. Papal envoys later travel to Mongol courts partly to learn who these people are, partly to seek diplomatic possibilities, and partly to imagine alliances against Muslim powers. These missions are full of misunderstanding, but they mark a shift. The Mongols are no longer only monsters from rumour. They are a real imperial power with whom Europe must communicate. A lesser-known consequence appears in Hungary's reconstruction. After the invasion, King Bela IV encourages the building of stronger stone fortifications and the settlement of defensive communities. The lesson is clear: wooden defences and open settlements are too vulnerable. Castles that resisted become models for survival. In this way, even a withdrawn invasion reshapes European military planning. The Mongols do not have to remain in a place to change it. Their absence can be as historically active as their presence. In Rus, the effect is more enduring. Unlike Hungary or Poland, many Rus lands remain under Mongol domination through the Golden Horde. Tribute, political approval, and military pressure alter the development of local rulership. Princes compete for Mongol favour. Some resist and are crushed. Others collaborate and rise. Moscow's later ascent occurs within this world of tribute politics, though historians continue to debate how directly Mongol rule shaped the later Russian state. What survives in the record suggests a complicated relationship, oppression, adaptation, opportunity, cultural exchange, and political learning all intertwined. The Mongols also become part of European imagination in distorted forms. Some writers describe them as inhuman savages, others search for signs that they might become allies or converts. Rumours link them to Prester John, to apocalyptic peoples, to divine punishment for sin. The lack of accurate knowledge creates a fog in which fear and fantasy mix. But envoys who actually reach Mongol lands bring back more grounded observations: the structure of camps, the authority of the Khan, the role of women, the discipline of armies, the diversity of subject peoples, and the demand that all rulers submit. This last point is crucial. Europeans may hope for alliance, but Mongol diplomacy often begins from a premise of universal sovereignty. The Khan does not see himself as one king among many. He sees submission as the proper order of the world. The European campaigns reveal both the reach and the limits of Mongol power. On the battlefield they are devastating. Against divided enemies they are brilliant. Across open and semi-open landscapes they can move with terrifying effect. But permanent conquest is another matter. Forested regions, dense castle networks, maritime powers, long supply lines, and succession politics complicate the dream of endless expansion. The Mongols are not stopped by one heroic wall or one miraculous battle. They are slowed by the combined friction of geography, politics, logistics, and their own imperial family. Still, for a brief moment in 1241, Europe stands at the edge of a possibility that remains haunting. What if the Mongols had continued? What if the succession crisis had not intervened? What if Western Europe had faced the same sustained pressure as Russes or northern China? These questions remain speculative, and unsupported certainty would be misleading. But their persistence shows the scale of the shock. The Mongols force even lands they do not conquer to imagine another history. When they withdraw, they leave Europe damaged, frightened, and more aware of the wider world. The frontier has moved in the European mind. Beyond Russes and the steppe is no longer an obscure distance, but a political reality tied to courts in Asia and armies that can reach the Danube. The Mongol Empire has touched Europe's edge and proved that world history is not centered where Europeans imagined it to be. Power can come from the grasslands. A decision made near Karakorum can change the fate of Hungary. A death in the ruling family of a steppe empire can spare cities that never knew the dead Khan's face. The riders turn back, but the road remains open. Fear gives way slowly to diplomacy, curiosity trade, and uneasy calculation. Europe has survived the first great shock, but it has also been pulled into the Mongol world. From this point on, the story is no longer only about conquest. It is about the strange peace that follows conquest, the guarded roads, the travelling envoys, the merchants moving under imperial protection, and the paradox that the same empire capable of burning cities can also make continents speak to one another. The phrase Mongol peace sounds almost impossible after the burning cities, broken kingdoms, and fields emptied by war. Peace is not the first word that rises from the ruins of Merv, the fall of Kiev, the terror of Hungary, or the long sieges of northern China. Yet history often moves through contradictions sharp enough to seem cruel. Once the Mongols have shattered many of the states that divided Eurasia, they create conditions in which certain roads become safer, certain merchants richer, certain envoys more ambitious, and certain kinds of knowledge more mobile than before. The peace is real in places and periods, but it is not gentle. It rests on fear, tribute discipline, and the memory of what happens to those who break the Khan's order. Under Mongol rule, a traveller with proper authorization can move across distances that would have once required passing through many suspicious borders. The relay stations provide horses and lodging. Local officials understand the weight of imperial documents. Merchants can organize caravans across regions linked by Mongol authority. Diplomats from Europe, the Islamic world, and East Asia cross landscapes that earlier generations knew mostly in fragments. This does not mean the roads are free of danger. Bandits still exist. Local abuses still occur. Wars between Mongol branches still interrupt movement, and ordinary villagers may suffer under the demands of passing officials. Still, compared with the fractured political world before conquest, the empire creates corridors of unusual reach. This is the Pax Mongolica paradox. Violence makes the roads, and the roads carry more than violence. Silk porcelain horses, furs, spices, medicines, metals, slaves, gems, and textiles move in greater quantities across connected markets. So do stories, religious ideas, diplomatic rumors, military techniques, astronomical observations, and artistic styles. A pattern on a textile may travel farther than the person who wove it. A medical recipe may pass through translators before reaching a court thousands of miles away. An artisan taken by force may teach a technique in a place he never wished to see. The empire becomes a vast engine of circulation, but many of its moving parts are human beings caught inside imperial power. One of the most important groups in this system is the merchant class, especially long-distance traders who know how to cross languages, currencies, and legal customs. The Mongol elite often depends on them not only for luxury goods, but for financial services and information. Merchant associations can receive official backing, sometimes operating with privileges that ordinary subjects envy or resent. Their caravans carry wealth to the courts of khans and princes, but they also carry news. A merchant knows which city is hungry, which ruler is angry, which route is unsafe, which governor is corrupt, which market wants silver, and which army is gathering horses. In an empire of distance, information is a kind of currency. The Mongols also encourage movement by protecting certain religious specialists and diplomatic visitors. Christian monks travel east hoping to convert Mongol rulers or form alliances. Muslim scholars and administrators move through the western Carnates. Buddhist monks find patrons in the east. Taoist masters, Tibetan lamas, Nestorian Christians, and others appear at imperial courts. The Khans often listen to many religious voices, sometimes from curiosity, sometimes from political calculation, sometimes from the belief that holy people of different traditions may possess useful spiritual power. This tolerance is uneven and pragmatic, not an abstract commitment to freedom of conscience, but it creates spaces where religions meet, at court compete for influence, and learn about one another. The surprising result is that the Mongol Empire, born from conquest on the steppe, becomes one of the great crossroads of medieval religious history. In one court, envoys might encounter Buddhists, Muslims, Christians, and shamans operating under the same imperial sky. Arguments over doctrine do not end rivalry, but they reveal a world more interconnected than many older histories admit. The evidence remains incomplete for many of these encounters, and later writers often exaggerate their own side's importance, but the pattern is clear. Mongol rule does not produce one universal faith. It produces a political space in which many faiths seek imperial favor. Knowledge travels in practical ways as well. Astronomers, physicians, engineers, scribes, translators, and mathematicians move through Mongol domains. Persian astronomical traditions influence work in China. Chinese medical and technical knowledge becomes known farther west in different forms. Gunpowder technologies and siege techniques spread through warfare and contact, though historians still debate the exact routes and timing of transmission. Paper printing and administrative methods also move through complex channels that cannot be reduced to a single Mongol gift to the world. The Mongols are not always inventors of the things that travel under their rule. They are accelerators, carriers, patrons, and sometimes violent distributors. A powerful example is the movement of artistic styles. Motifs from Chinese painting, Persian manuscript art, Central Asian textiles, and steppe ornament begin to appear in new combinations. Dragons, clouds, lotus forms, animal patterns, and textile designs travel across objects and workshops. Under the Ilkhanate in Persia, East Asian visual elements enter Persian art in striking ways. In Yuan China, artisans from many backgrounds serve a court ruled by Mongols, yet deeply entangled with Chinese imperial traditions. The empire does not create a single global culture, but it creates contact zones where styles can cross and transform. The movement of people is less romantic. Captives are relocated, families are separated, skilled workers are assigned to imperial service. Some rise to influence wealth and security, others remain uprooted labourers whose names disappear. When later historians admire the spread of technology under Mongol rule, the human cost can fade too easily. A potter moved across Eurasia may spread a technique, but he may also have lost his home forever. A doctor serving a Khan may gain privilege, but he may be doing so because refusal was impossible. The Pax Mongolica is built on both opportunity and coercion. Even the relay system, so impressive from a distance, reveals the double nature of Mongol order. For an envoy or imperial courier, the yam can be a marvel, fresh horses waiting food available stations spaced across enormous territories. For local people it can be a burden. They must supply animals, labour provisions and maintenance. Officials with tablets of authority may demand more than they should. Abuse becomes common enough that later rulers try to regulate it. What appears as smooth imperial infrastructure in a traveller's account may feel like exhaustion in the villages that sustain it. The Mongols also reshape ideas of sovereignty. Their diplomatic language often assumes that heaven has granted the Khan authority over the world. Foreign rulers are expected to submit even when Mongol envoys frame the demand politely. This creates repeated misunderstandings. European envoys may seek alliance. Mongol courts hear the approach as the first step towards submission. Muslim rulers may seek negotiation. Mongol ideology may leave little room for equality. Chinese imperial traditions, Islamic kingship, Christian monarchy and steppe universalism meet uneasily. The roads connect courts, but they do not make those courts understand one another. The paradox deepens because Mongol rule can sometimes restore order after the Mongols themselves have caused ruin. A conquered region may first suffer massacre, then later experience protected trade under Mongol administration. A city may lose much of its population, then recover as a tax centre or commercial hub. A road may be unsafe during invasion, then safer under imperial patrol. This sequence does not cancel the suffering. It makes the historical judgment more difficult. No single explanation fully accounts for the Mongol legacy, because the empire repeatedly destroys and preserves wounds, and connects up roots and transmits. The people who benefit most are often those who can move merchants, envoys, specialist interpreters, and imperial servants. The people who suffer most are often those who cannot, farmers tied to fields, villagers near military routes, towns that resist ordinary families without skills the conquerors value. This unevenness matters. World history often celebrates exchange because exchange leaves beautiful traces: maps, books, luxury goods, diplomatic accounts, new artistic forms. But the silent majority experiences empire as tax requisition fear, and the arrival of strangers with authority. Yet there is no denying that the 13th century world becomes more connected under Mongol power. Europe gains more accurate information about East Asia. China becomes more aware of Western lands. Islamic scholars work within a world altered by Mongol patronage and destruction. Trade routes across Central Asia pulse with new intensity in certain periods. The empire's vastness allows ideas to travel not as isolated accidents, but as part of repeated contact. The horizon widens. This widening changes how civilizations imagine themselves. A ruler in Europe can no longer think of Asia only as legend. A Persian administrator may serve rulers whose authority begins in the steppe and stretches toward China. A Chinese scholar under Yuan rule lives in an empire whose elite connections reach far beyond the old borders of Chinese dynastic politics. The Mongol century forces many societies to confront the fact that they are part of a larger, harsher, more interconnected world. But roads that carry merchants can carry danger invisible to the eye. Animals, fleas, rats, soldiers, grain shipments, caravans, refugees, and ships all belong to networks of movement. The same imperial connections that allow goods and ideas to cross Eurasia may also help disease move with devastating speed. The Mongols do not invent epidemic disease, and the causes of later pandemics are complex and still debated in details. But the world they help connect becomes a world in which catastrophe can travel farther. The peace of the roads has a shadow moving inside it, small as a flea, silent as breath, and capable of killing more people than armies. The roads that bind Eurasia under Mongol power do not carry only silk, silver envoys, monks, engineers, and orders sealed by imperial authority. They also carry things no messenger can see clearly: infection, hunger, ecological strain, and the hidden costs of forcing distant worlds into closer contact. The Mongol Empire makes movement easier for those protected by power, but movement itself is never innocent. Every caravan needs animals, every army needs pasture, every relay station needs food. Every conquered province must send wealth somewhere else. Beneath the grand story of exchange lies a quieter story of pressure. Disease belongs to that story, though carefully. It would be too simple to say the Mongols caused the Black Death in a direct single line. Epidemic history is rarely that neat. Plague has ecological roots involving rodents, fleas, climate conditions, trade routes, settlement patterns, and human movement. Scholars still debate the exact pathways by which the 14th century pandemic spread across Eurasia and into Europe. But the Mongol world helps create the kind of connected landscape through which disease can travel widely. When roads, armies, merchants, ports, and caravan routes link distant regions more tightly, microbes gain opportunities along with merchants. The most famous and disputed episode is the Siege of Kaffa in the 1340s, when forces of the Golden Horde besieged the Genoese trading colony on the Black Sea. Later accounts claim plague-infected bodies were hurled into the city, an image so vivid that it has often been repeated as an early example of biological warfare. The story may contain truth exaggeration or later interpretation. The evidence remains incomplete, and historians continue to debate how decisive the episode was in bringing plague to the Mediterranean. What matters most is larger than one siege. By that time, the Mongol-connected world has tied the Black Sea, Central Asia, the steppe, the Mediterranean, and China into overlapping networks. Disease does not need one dramatic act when ordinary movement can do the work. The Black Death that follows kills on a scale beyond most wars reshaping societies, from Europe to the Middle East and beyond. Its relationship to Mongol networks is part of the empire's darker legacy. The same routes that allow a European envoy to reach the Khan, the same commercial corridors that carry silk and spices can also carry infected fleas in grain textiles or animal cargo. No imperial order commands plague to travel. No Khan needs to understand bacteria or fleas. Connectivity itself becomes the channel. The Mongol century helps reveal a permanent truth of world history. When human worlds become more connected, their disasters become more connected too. There are ecological costs as well. Mongol armies depend on horses in enormous numbers. Herds need grazing. Campaigns require remounts, livestock, and seasonal planning. In some regions, the arrival of a large mounted forces strains local environments. Fields are trampled, villages stripped of fodder, forests cut for siege, works canals neglected, and irrigation systems damaged by war or abandoned labour. In Central Asia and Iran, historians have long debated how far Mongol conquest contributed to agricultural decline. Older accounts sometimes blame the Mongols almost entirely for the ruin of irrigation and urban life. More recent scholarship is often more cautious, pointing to regional variation, pre-existing political issues, environmental shifts, and later events. But caution does not erase damage. In many places, conquest disrupts the delicate systems that make settled life possible. Irrigation is especially vulnerable. A canal is not just a ditch filled with water. It is an agreement across time. Someone must clear silt repair banks, manage flow, protect fields, and coordinate labour. War breaks that agreement. Kill or scatter the people who maintain the system. And water no longer obeys human plans. A city surrounded by gardens can become a dry memory within a generation if canals fail. What survives in the record suggests that some regions recover, while others lose population and productivity for long periods. The Mongols do not destroy every irrigation system they encounter, but where violence is severe and administration weak, the consequences can outlast the battle by centuries. Taxation adds another burden. Once conquest stabilizes, Mongol rulers want revenue. They count households, demand tribute, assign taxes, and grant privileges to princes, officials, military units, and merchants. In theory, taxation replaces random plunder with predictable extraction. In practice, the line can blur. Local populations may face overlapping demands from different authorities. Tax farmers may squeeze community harshly. Officials may abuse imperial privileges. Villagers may flee rather than pay. The empire's need for wealth does not end when armies stop burning cities. It becomes more organized and sometimes more relentless. The burden is not evenly distributed. Mobile elites and merchants with imperial protection may profit while farmers tied to land carry heavy obligations. Artisans may be preserved because they are useful, but preservation can mean forced relocation. Women and children may survive conquest only to be taken into servitude, marriage, labor, or distant households. The Mongol Empire's global connections are often described through famous travelers and luxury goods, but most people experience empire at the level of grain animals, sons, conscripted daughters, taken taxes assessed, and officials arriving with documents. No one in the village can refuse. Human displacement becomes one of the empire's defining patterns. Some movement is voluntary merchants seeking profit, monks seeking patrons, diplomats seeking alliances. Much of it is not. Captives are marched across regions. Specialists are assigned to workshops far from home. Soldiers from one conquered people are used in campaigns against another. Administrators serve rulers whose language they may not speak at first. This creates extraordinary cultural exchange, but it also tears people from local worlds. A skilled weaver in a new imperial workshop may leave behind a town that no longer exists. A young captive may grow old speaking several languages, but never return to the river of his childhood. There is also psychological cost in the long memory of terror. Regions that submit may avoid destruction, but they do not forget why they submitted. Chronicles from Persian, Armenian, Russian, Chinese, and other traditions preserve the Mongols not only as rulers, but as a rupture in moral time. Some accounts are shaped by grief, religious interpretation, political agenda, or exaggeration, but the emotional truth is powerful. The Mongol arrival feels to many witnesses like the breaking of the ordinary world. Fields can be replanted, markets reopened, walls rebuilt. Trust is harder to restore, yet the empire itself changes under the weight of what it has conquered. Mongol rulers who govern agricultural lands cannot live forever as pure steppe conquerors. They must protect farmers enough to tax them. They must maintain roads enough to use them. They must restrain some forms of violence so revenue continues. Advisors from China, Persia, Central Asia, and other regions teach the conquerors that stability can be more profitable than devastation. The lesson is practical, not sentimental. Still, it gradually changes policy in many places. The Mongols begin as masters of movement and become in several regions reluctant guardians of settled production. This transformation creates tensions among Mongol elites. Some prefer traditional steppe extraction, seasonal movement, and the rewards of conquest. Others adapt to local imperial models, adopting Chinese, Persian, Islamic, or other administrative habits. In the Ilkhanate, rulers eventually convert to Islam. In China, Kublai Khan presents himself as emperor. In the Golden Horde, steppe traditions mix with Islamic and Turkic influences. The empire fragments not only because of succession disputes, but because different regions pull Mongol rulers into different worlds. The costs of empire include cultural absorption. The conquerors change the conquered, but the conquered also change the conquerors. No single explanation fully accounts for the Mongol Empire's hidden costs, because those costs differ across landscapes. In one place, the main legacy may be depopulation. In another, heavier taxation. In another, disease movement. In another, political subordination. In another, the loss of an older elite and the rise of new intermediaries. The empire is too vast for one verdict. But the darker pattern remains. Connection is paid for by bodies, labour, animals, fields, and memory. The Mongols rewrote world history by shrinking distance, but shrinking distance magnified consequence. A decision in one court could affect a caravan months away. A war in the steppe could unsettle grain prices in a city. A plague reservoir in one region could become a continental catastrophe. A captured engineer could change the fate of a siege in a land he'd never heard of as a child. The world became more entangled, and entanglement made both opportunity and disaster travel farther. By the mid-13th century, the empire stands at an uneasy height. Its roads are alive, its courts wealthy. Its armies feared its subject peoples, burdened its princes ambitious, and its networks powerful enough to move goods, ideas, and death across continents. The next great transformation comes in the east, where one branch of the Mongol ruling house turns toward the full conquest of China. There, under Kublai Khan, the empire will attempt something even Genghis Khan never completed, to become not merely the terror beyond the wall, but the dynasty inside it. Kublai Khan inherits more than armies. He inherits a question that has been growing since the first Mongol campaigns against northern China. Can a people born from the steppe rule, the richest settled civilization in the world, without being swallowed by it, resisted by it, or forced to become something different from what they were? His grandfather Genghis Khan had broken frontiers and humbled dynasties, but he had not conquered all of China. The south remained under the Song, a dynasty wealthy, literate, urban, and technologically sophisticated, protected by rivers, mountains, fortified cities, and a naval world that does not easily yield to horsemen. To take it, the Mongols must complete their transformation from steppe conquerors into imperial rulers of land, water, bureaucracy, and grain. Kublai rises within the fractured but still powerful world of Genghis Khan's descendants. He is a grandson of the founder brother of Mongol Khan, and a ruler deeply shaped by Chinese advisors, Buddhist teachers, Mongol traditions, and the politics of the imperial family. After Mongol dies in 1259 during campaigns against the Song, the succession becomes contested. Kublai's struggle with his brother Arik Berke is more than a family quarrel. It is a contest over the empire's centre of gravity. Arik Berke represents the Mongol homeland and older steppe power, more directly, while Kublai's base lies in northern China. Kublai wins, but the victory comes at a cost. The unity of the empire weakens. Other khanates recognize him unevenly or resist his authority. The great Khan still claims universal rule, but the empire is becoming a constellation of Mongol states rather than one obedient machine. In China, Kublai does something momentous. He founds the Yuan dynasty, presenting himself not merely as a foreign conqueror, but as a legitimate emperor in the Chinese dynastic tradition. This is a political act of adaptation. To rule China, he must speak in forms Chinese subjects, understand reign titles, court rituals, administrative hierarchies, taxation systems, and the symbolism of the mandate of heaven. Yet he does not simply become Chinese. The Yuan court preserves Mongol privilege, maintains social distinctions, and draws officials from many peoples. Mongols, Central and West Asians, often grouped as semi-northern Chinese and southern Chinese. This hierarchy reflects conquest and mistrust. Kublai needs Chinese administrative expertise, but he does not fully trust the old elite he has conquered. The conquest of the Song is long and difficult. The Song state is not weak in the simple sense. It has immense economic resources, strong cities, skilled administrators, advanced manufacturing and naval capacity. Its weakness lies partly in the challenge of defending a vast riverine and urban landscape against an enemy willing to adapt. The Mongols use Chinese and Muslim engineers' siege machines, naval forces, defectors, and patient pressure. The struggle for Xiangyang becomes especially important. This fortified city complex controls access along strategic routes, and its fall after a prolonged siege opens the way deeper into Song territory. Counterweight trebuchets associated in sources with engineers from the Islamic world help demonstrate how Mongol conquest now draws on technologies from across Eurasia. The army before Xiangyang is not the same force that once united the steppe. When the Song finally falls in 1279 after the naval battle of Yamen, the Mongols achieve what no previous northern conquest dynasty had done so completely: they rule all China. The last Song loyalists are defeated at sea, and with them ends one of the great dynasties of world history. The image is powerful, a steppe empire born from horses and grasslands, completing its conquest not on an open plain but on water. Scholars still debate many details of late Song resistance and Yuan consolidation, but the broad transformation is clear. The Mongols have crossed every ecological and military boundary that once seemed to limit them: steppe, desert, city, river, and sea. Kublai's China is wealthy, cosmopolitan, and strained. He maintains a capital at Dedu, modern Beijing, turning it into a center of Yuan power. The city becomes a place where Mongol rulers, Chinese officials, Tibetan Buddhist figures, Muslim astronomers, Central Asian merchants, artisans, and foreign visitors all move through the machinery of empire. Marco Polo's famous account, whatever its debated details, reflects the fascination this world inspires in outsiders: paper money, coal postal stations, grand canals, court ceremony, enormous cities, and a ruler whose power seems to stretch beyond normal imagination. The Yuan world appears both Chinese and global, both ancient and newly connected. Kublai supports major infrastructure, including improvements to transport and grain supply. The Grand Canal system becomes crucial for moving resources northward. Paper money circulates under state authority, though its management becomes difficult over time. The Yuan administration relies on censuses, taxes, monopolies, and regional officials. It also patronizes astronomy, medicine translation, printing, drama, and religious institutions. Tibetan Buddhism gains special prominence at court, especially through the relationship between Kublai and the Sakya school. This patronage shapes the political and religious history of Tibetan Mongolia for centuries. Yet religious favor does not erase diversity. Muslims, Christians, Taoists, Buddhists, and Confucian scholars all exist within Yuan rule, though not with equal influence. A lesser-known but important feature of Yuan society is the tension between preservation and exclusion. Kublai wants the productivity of China, but he also wants to prevent the Mongols from dissolving into the conquered population. Laws and customs maintain distinctions in status, military privilege, marriage patterns, and administrative access. Southern Chinese elites, having resisted longest, often face lower status than northern groups. This creates resentment. At the same time, many Chinese officials serve the Yuan not because they love conquest, but because governance continues, families need security, and scholarship can adapt even under foreign rule. Collaboration and resistance are not always clean categories. Many people live in between. The Yuan dynasty also reveals the limits of Mongol expansion. Kublai launches costly campaigns beyond China, including invasions of Japan, Vietnam, Burma, and Java. These campaigns show both ambition and overreach. The attempted invasions of Japan in 1274 and 1281 fail, the second famously wrecked by storms, later remembered as divine winds. But storms alone do not explain everything. Japanese defenses, logistical problems, naval challenges, command difficulties, and the limits of operating across the sea all matter. The Mongols, masters of continental movement, struggle when horses and relay stations are no longer enough. Maritime empire demands different skills, and conquest does not translate perfectly from land to ocean. In Vietnam, Mongol Yuan forces face heat disease, terrain supply difficulties, and determined resistance from the Tran dynasty. Campaigns bring destruction, but not lasting conquest. In Southeast Asia, the environment itself becomes an adversary. Forests, rivers, humidity, local military strategies, and distance from the Yuan heartland. These failures are not minor footnotes. They show that the Mongol method, even after adaptation, has boundaries. The empire can learn siegecraft and naval warfare, but it cannot escape geography. Kublai's reign therefore stands as both culmination and warning. He completes the conquest of China and creates one of the most remarkable imperial courts of the medieval world. He deepens Eurasian exchange and gives Mongol power a Chinese dynastic face. Yet his wars strain resources, his administration carries ethnic tensions, and his claim to universal authority is increasingly symbolic outside his own domains. The Western Khanates pursue their own interests. The Chagatai realm, the Golden Horde, and the Ilkhanate do not simply behave as provinces of Dadu. The Mongol Empire still exists as a family memory and diplomatic language, but political unity is slipping. No single explanation fully accounts for the Yuan dynasty's later difficulties. Fiscal strain, inflation, factional conflict, natural disasters, social resentment, corruption, and rebellion all play roles. Mongol rule in China lasts less than a century before the Ming dynasty drives it out in 1368. Yet its impact is far larger than its duration. The Yuan connects China more directly to Inner Asia and the wider Mongol world. It changes Beijing's imperial significance. It shapes Tibetan-Mongol religious ties. It leaves memories of foreign rule that later Chinese historians interpret through the dynastic cycle. it also reveals the central paradox of Mongol adaptation. To rule a great civilization, the conqueror must adopt its tools, but every adopted tool changes the conqueror. Kublai Khan's world empire is therefore not simply the story of a Mongol becoming a Chinese emperor. It is the story of an empire reaching the height of its geographical imagination and discovering the limits hidden inside success. On land, the Mongols had made distance collapse. In China, they learned that ruling density is harder than crossing emptiness. At sea, they learned that the horizon can resist even the heirs of Genghis Khan. The empire has conquered more than any steppe power before it, but its vastness now pulls in different directions. The giant is still alive, but its limbs are beginning to move separately. By the later 13th century, the Mongol Empire still stretches across maps in a way no previous empire has matched, yet it no longer behaves as a single organism. What had once been held together by the authority of Genghis Khan and the momentum of conquest now begins to settle into distinct political worlds. The unity that rewrote history does not vanish overnight, but it thins frays and reshapes itself into separate khanates, each carrying part of the Mongol legacy and part of its contradictions. In the west, the Golden Horde dominates the steppe north of the Black Sea and across the Volga region. It rules over Turkic-speaking populations, interacts with the Ruses' principalities, and gradually becomes part of the Islamic world. Its rulers convert to Islam over time, a transformation that reflects both political pragmatism and cultural integration. The Horde maintains tribute systems over Rus, shaping regional politics for generations. Yet it is no longer taking orders from a central Mongol authority in China. It is its own power, with its own ambitions, rivalries, and internal struggles. To the south in Persia and parts of the Middle East, the Ilkhanate emerges. Founded by Hulagu, a grandson of Genghis Khan, it is born from campaigns that include the fall of Baghdad in 1258, one of the most symbolic and devastating moments in Islamic history. The Abbasid Caliphate, long a spiritual centre of the Muslim world, collapses under Mongol assault. The destruction shocks contemporaries deeply, though as always the scale and specific details are debated among historians. What survives in the record suggests both catastrophic violence and the rapid reorganization of power under Mongol rule. Over time, the Ilkhanate also adopts Islam, showing again how conquerors are shaped by the lands they rule. In Central Asia, the Chagatai Khanate occupies the lands between East and West, inheriting both steppe traditions and settled urban centres. It becomes a zone of cultural blending and political tension, where Turkic, Persian and Mongol influences interact. The Chagatai realm often serves as a corridor between other Mongol states, but it is also a battleground for competing interests. Its rulers struggle to maintain control over both nomadic and settled populations, a balance that proves difficult across generations. In the east, the Yuan dynasty under Kublai Khan and his successors continues to rule China, though increasingly as a Chinese-style dynasty with Mongol characteristics rather than the unquestioned centre of a global empire. Communication with the Western Khanates becomes more formal than commanding. Diplomatic exchanges continue, but authority is fragmented. The idea of a single great Khan ruling all Mongol lands persists in theory longer than in practice. This fragmentation does not mean collapse in the immediate sense. Trade continues across many regions. Diplomatic contacts still exist. Cultural exchange remains active. But the unity that once allowed coordinated campaigns across continents no longer functions. A general in Persia does not receive orders from Beijing. A Khan in the Golden Horde does not wait for approval from the Yuan court. The empire has become a family of states rather than a single state. The causes of this division are not mysterious, but they are complex. Distance is an obvious factor. Even with relay systems, the sheer size of the empire makes centralized control difficult. Succession disputes weaken unity. Different regions face different problems and opportunities. The needs of ruling China are not the same as those of controlling the Western Steppe or managing Persian cities. Over time, local conditions pull Mongol rulers into local identities. There is also a deeper transformation at work. The Mongols begin as conquerors with a shared culture of mobility warfare and loyalty to the house of Genghis Khan. As they settle into different regions, they absorb the cultures around them. In China, they adopt bureaucratic governance. In Persia, they engage with Islamic traditions. In the steppe, they maintain older nomadic practices. These adaptations are necessary for rule, but they reduce the sense of a single Mongol identity governing everything. The empire does not fall apart because it is weak. It changes because it becomes too diverse to remain one. A lesser known but revealing detail is how language shifts across these regions. Mongol elites begin using local administrative languages, Persian, in the Ilkhanate Chinese, in the Yuan Turkic languages in the Golden Horde. The original Mongolian language remains important within the ruling class, but it is no longer the sole medium of power. Translation becomes constant. Over time, even the memory of a unified linguistic and cultural core begins to fade in some areas. Trade networks continue, but they are no longer guaranteed by a single authority. Conflicts between khanates can disrupt routes. Local instability can return. The Pax Mongolica becomes less stable, more dependent on regional conditions. Merchants must navigate a more complicated political landscape. Some routes remain active, others decline. The great connected world of the Mongol century does not disappear, but it becomes less predictable. Meanwhile, new powers begin to rise within the spaces the Mongols have reshaped. In Russia, the Principality of Moscow slowly strengthens under the shadow of the Golden Horde, learning to navigate tribute politics and eventually challenge Mongol authority. In China, resentment against Yuan rule grows, contributing to rebellions that will eventually lead to the rise of the Ming dynasty. In the Middle East, post-Mongol states reorganize political life after the collapse of older systems. The Mongol legacy becomes embedded in these emerging worlds. Military tactics, administrative practices, trade connections, and political ideas shaped during the Mongol period continue to influence later states. Even where Mongol rule ends, its effects do not. Borders, power structures, and cultural exchanges carry traces of the empire's presence. Scholars still debate how to interpret this phase. Was the fragmentation inevitable from the beginning given the empire's size? Could stronger succession systems or administrative reforms have preserved unity longer? Or was the empire's greatest strength its ability to adapt and absorb, also the force that made it impossible to remain one? No single explanation fully accounts for the transition, but the pattern is clear enough. The empire that once moved like a storm across continents becomes a set of climates, each shaped by its own geography and history. The fragmentation also changes how the Mongols are remembered. In some regions they are recalled primarily as destroyers, in others as rulers who brought order and connection, in still others as ancestors whose identity merges with local populations. Memory itself fragments just as the empire does. There is no single Mongol story anymore. There are many, each rooted in different experiences of conquest, rule, adaptation, and survival. By the time the 14th century advances, the Mongol Empire as a unified force is gone, but its impact remains everywhere it touched. Trade routes still carry goods along paths the Mongols secured. Political systems still reflect structures shaped during their rule. Cultural exchanges continue to echo across regions once linked under a single authority. The world does not return to what it was before the Mongols. It cannot. The giant has broken apart, but the ground it walked on is permanently altered. The Mongol Empire disappears as a single political force, but the world it altered does not return to its earlier shape. That is the deepest measure of its power. Some empires leave monuments, capitals, inscriptions, temples, and ruins that make their presence visible centuries later. The Mongols leave those too in scattered forms, but their larger legacy is harder to see because it lies inside roots, state spheres, military habits, trade patterns, and memories of connection. They rewrite world history not by creating one lasting universal empire, but by forcing distant civilizations into contact at a scale and speed that changes what later centuries can imagine. Before the Mongol century, Eurasia is already connected, but unevenly through older Silk Road networks, maritime routes, religious missions, migrations, and trade corridors. After the Mongols, those connections become more intense and more politically visible. Europeans know more about Asia. China becomes tied more directly to Inner Asia and the wider world. Persian scholars, administrators, and artists work inside systems shaped by Mongol rule. Russ's principalities live for generations under the shadow of the Golden Horde. Islamic political life is transformed after the fall of Baghdad and the rise of Mongol successor states. No single explanation fully accounts for all these changes, but together they mark a world pulled into a wider frame. Their military legacy is equally deep. The Mongols show what disciplined mobility can do against larger, slower, divided enemies. They demonstrate the value of intelligence coordination, psychological warfare, and flexible command. Later states study them with fear and admiration. Their enemies learn to build stronger fortifications, organize better cavalry, and think more carefully about logistics. Even their failures teach lessons. Japan, Vietnam, and other regions reveal that geography, climate, naval warfare, and local resistance can blunt even the most terrifying land empire. Yet the legacy remains morally unsettled. The Mongols connect continents, but they do so through conquest. They protect trade, but they also devastate cities. They move knowledge, but often by moving captives. They tolerate many religions, but demand submission to imperial power. They help create conditions for exchange, but also for the wider movement of disease. Scholars still debate whether their long-term influence should be seen primarily as destructive, connective, or transformative. The evidence remains incomplete because conquest itself destroyed so many voices that might have answered. What survives is a world permanently marked by their passage. Borders shift, dynasties fall, new states rise from the fragments. Moscow grows in a political landscape shaped by the Horde. The Ming defines itself partly against Yuan rule. Persianate culture absorbs and transforms Mongol power. Central Asia becomes a memory field of both splendor and rupture. The Mongols do not merely pass through history like raiders in the night. They become part of the structure of what follows. Perhaps the most surprising legacy is that a people from the grasslands, long dismissed by settled empires as peripheral, forced the great civilizations to recognize the power of the spaces between them. The steppe was not empty. It was a corridor, a training ground, a political world, and finally a bridge of conquest. From that bridge came terror, exchange, collapse, adaptation, and a new awareness of distance. The Mongols made Eurasia feel smaller, harsher, and more connected. Their empire broke apart, but the question it left behind remains alive. How does the world change when movement becomes stronger than walls? The answer is written not in one capital, but across continents in ruined cities, surviving roads, altered states, shared technologies, and memories that still carry the sound of hooves. Final wind down, and after all the campaigns, after the riders vanish from the horizon, and the dust settles back into the grass, the steppe remains. The wind still moves over Mongolia, as it did before Temujin's birth, bending the grass in long silver waves beneath an enormous sky. The cities that feared his descendants continue in other forms or sink into ruins. The roads change names, the dynasties change banners, the languages of power shift from Mongolian to Persian, Chinese, Turkic, Russian, and many others. But something of that century remains suspended over the map like a shadow that also became a bridge. The Mongol Empire is difficult to hold in the mind because it was never only one thing. It was a catastrophe for many, an opportunity for some, a connector of worlds, a destroyer of worlds, a family inheritance, a military machine, a trade network, and a warning about how quickly history can move when distance loses its protection. It began in a landscape that settled empires underestimated and ended by changing nearly every settled empire it touched. In the quiet after the story, the image that lingers is not only of armies, it is also of messengers changing horses at relay stations, artisans working far from home, monks crossing deserts with letters, merchants listening for rumours in caravanserais, farmers repairing canals after war, and children growing up under rulers whose ancestors had arrived from beyond the horizon. World history is not made only by those who build walls. Sometimes it is remade by those who learn how to cross every space between them. The hoofbeats fade, but the road remains.